would like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone here this morning. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Education for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. I would ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. My name is Layla Goodridge and I am the MLA for Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche and the chair of this committee. We will begin to my right.
Good morning, Thomas Dang, MLA for Edmonton South and acting deputy chair of this meeting.
Morning, Nathan Newdorf, MLA for Lethbridge East.
Mark Smith, MLA for Drayton Valley Devon.
Michaela Glasgow, MLA, Brooks Medicine Hat.
Jackie Lovely, Camrose constituency.
Raki Pancholi, MLA Edmonton Whitemud.
Sarah Hoffman, Edmonton Glenora.
Now we'll go to the members participating virtually. When I call your name, please introduce yourself for the record. Brad Rutherford.
Good morning, Brad Rutherford, MLA, Leduc Beaumont.
Mickey Amory.
Good morning, committee members. Mickey Amory, MLA, Calgary Cross.
Richard Godfried.
Good morning, Richard Godfried, MLA, Calgary Fish Creek.
Due to the current landscape we are in, all ministry staff will be participating in the estimate debate virtually. Minister, I will ask that you please introduce yourself and any of the officials who are joining you who may be speaking on the record.
Happy to do so. With me today, I have Andre Tremblay, Deputy Minister, Brad Smith, Assistant Deputy Minister, Financial Services, Emily Ma, Director, Budget and Fiscal Analysis, Financial Services. I also have representatives from my ministry who are ready to help me answer any of the questions that may come forward. Paul Lamoureux, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, Program and System Support, Jeff Willen, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Services and Governance, Tracy Amai, Chief of Staff for the Deputy Minister's Office, Chris Bordeaux, Communications Director, Richard Arnold, Acting Executive Director for the K-12 Fiscal Oversight Sector, and Alison Bain, Manager, Policy and Strategy, Deputy Minister's Office.
Thank you, Minister. I would like to note the following substitutions for the record. Mr. Dang as Deputy Chair for MLA Sigurdsson, MLA Laurie Sigurdsson, just for clarification. And before we begin, I would note that in accordance with the recommendations from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, attendees at today's meeting are advised to leave the appropriate distance between themselves and others meeting participants. In addition, as indicated in the February 25th, 2021 memo from the Honourable Speaker Cooper, I would remind everybody of committee room protocols in line with health guidelines, which require members to wear masks in the committee rooms and while seated, except when speaking, at which time they may choose to not wear a mask. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by the Hansard staff and committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Those participating virtually are asked to turn on their camera while speaking and please mute your microphone when not speaking. To be placed on the speakers list, virtual participants should email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please wave or otherwise signal to the chair. Please set your cell phone and all other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Honourable members, the standing order set out the process for consideration of main estimates. A total of 6 hours has been scheduled for the consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Education. Standing Order 59017 establishes the speaking rotation and speaking times. In brief, the minister or a member of Executive Council acting on the minister's behalf will have 10 minutes to address the committee. At the conclusion of her remarks, a 60-minute speaking block for the official opposition begins, followed by a 20-minute speaking block for independent members, if any, and then a 20-minute speaking block for the government caucus. Individuals may only speak for 10 minutes at a time, but time may be combined between the member and the minister. The rotation of speaking time will then follow the same rotation of the official opposition, independent members, and then government caucus, with individual speaking times set to 5 minutes for both the ministry and the member. These times may be combined into a 10-minute block. On a final note, please remember that all conversations must flow through the chair at all times, regardless as to whether or not speaking times are combined. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or message to the committee clerk about the process. With the concurrence of the committee, I will call a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting. However, the 3-hour clock will continue to run. Is anyone opposed to having a break? Wonderful. We will coordinate with the other group to have a break at the midpoint so that we're not both groups going for a break at the same time. Ministry officials, at the direction of the minister, may address the committee. Ministry officials are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. And space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit appropriately distanced at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the table at all times. If debate is exhausted prior to the 6 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the full time allotted in the schedule, and the committee will adjourn. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise. However, the speaking block and the overall 3-hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written material provided in the response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the minister in the assembly for the benefit of all members. The vote on the estimates or any amendments will occur in Committee of Supply on March 17th, 2021. Amendments must be in writing and approved by Parliamentary Council prior to the meeting at which they are to be moved. The original amendment is to be deposited with the committee clerk, and as a courtesy, an electronic version of the signed original should be provided to the committee clerk for distribution to committee members. I will now invite the Minister of Education to begin with her opening remarks. Minister, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today to discuss Education's 2021 budget and main estimates. As everyone knows, we are in the midst of an extraordinarily challenging time for all Albertans, and the government's overall financial approach has shifted as a result. Budget 2021 protects lives and livelihoods with a historic investment in healthcare while laying the foundation for economic growth. Through the prudent management of tax dollars, Alberta's government can continue to invest in priority areas to ensure Alberta emerges from COVID-19 stronger than ever. And one of these priority areas is our kindergarten to grade 12 education system. Before I take questions, I'll give you a brief overview of the commitments our government has made in the latest budget to ensure that all students can access a high-quality education, while also ensuring we are prudent with the public money we spend. I'm pleased to say that Budget 2021 offers stability to the K-12 education system by maintaining funding. This means no school board will receive less operating funding next school year than they did in the 2020-21 school year. Our commitment to funding the education of young Albertans remains even within the fiscal challenges that the province is facing. Alberta has one of the best funded education systems in Canada. And as always, our goal is to drive as many dollars as possible into the classroom. As seen on page 102 of the fiscal plan, the Department of Education funding and operations line is the same as last budget at $7.621 billion. These are the dollars the province provides to school authorities to operate, as well as to run the Department of Education. Reductions in anticipated spending of reserves and the use of own source of revenue by jurisdictions is expected to decline this fiscal year. Total consolidated support for the education system is maintained at approximately $8.3 billion. Some people have erroneously reported that this means we have cut $160 million from education. This is simply not true. Alberta's consolidated budget includes reserve and own source revenue spending by school boards. Last year, we projected boards would increase their reserve spending as the system transitioned to the new education funding model. This budget, we project boards won't spend as much of their reserve dollars, and our consolidated budget of $8.3 billion reflects that projection. Our investment in education has been maintained. Again, I point everyone to the Department of Education funding and operations line of the fiscal plan. It remains at $7.621 billion. The strong financial support provided by Alberta's government also shows up in the robust financial health of school authorities. At the end of the 2019-2020 school year, school boards reported a total of $384 million in operating reserves as a surplus and $222 million in capital reserves. This is an increase from the previous year, which was $363 million and $208 million, respectively. Alberta students deserve a world-class, high-quality education, and that starts with stable funding for school authorities. As you know, this upcoming September, we will enter the second year of the new kindergarten to grade 12 funding model. Our commitment to stable and predictable education funding is why we introduced the model for the current school year. It means the enrollment changes have less of an impact on funding, and it supports appropriate planning for school authorities who will receive their funding commitment letters well ahead of the school year. The 2021-22 funding manual will be posted, and each school authority's funding profile will be provided by the end of March. The education funding model is simplified, flexible system that has fewer funding envelopes and reporting requirements. These are all characteristics that the system told us they wanted to see. It also allows us to take concrete action to put education spending on a more sustainable path for the long term. Starting in 2019, we maintained the education budget because enrollment and inflation over the previous 15 years had grown by 58%, but operating costs had grown by 80%. In 2020, operating costs continue to outpace enrollment and inflation, and you can see that on page 103 of the current fiscal plan. Looking ahead, maintaining our education investment at its current level, along with the introduction of the updated funding model, should get us exactly where we need to be. Turning to the model's weighted moving average approach, we know education partners were concerned with how it would affect funding levels due to the declining enrollment this year because of the pandemic. We heard our partners loud and clear. I am pleased to say the boards will not be penalized because of this unexpected event. This means we are maintaining education funding to school authorities despite the decrease in enrollment. And this decline in enrollment is significant across the province. This school year, we have 9,300 fewer students in our schools than the year before. In Budget 2021, the decision not to penalize school means that $130 million will remain in the system that otherwise would have been removed due to declines in enrollment. In addition, school boards can continue to request approval to use their school board reserves if needed. This COVID-19 mitigation funding further demonstrates our commitment to provide school authorities with the resources they require to support safe learning for all Alberta students. Moving on to learning support funding. We continue to value our series of grants within this envelope, which includes program unit funding, commonly referred to as PUF, and the Specialized Learning Support Grant. With the new funding model, changes were introduced in the structure of these supports. At that time, I committed to monitoring the impacts of the new model. Therefore, we are providing an additional $40 million to the learning support envelope of grants. Alberta Education will continue to examine the funding under learning support funding grants in order to ensure that our most vulnerable students and children are supported. More information on this matter will be communicated to school authorities in the coming weeks. Another area of interest is always student transportation. Continuing with our theme of maintaining and being stable in this area, funding for transportation will be at $310 million, which is the same as last year. And I remind you, last year's budget added $15 million to this grant envelope. As you all know, starting this year, government and education partners will begin to implement the largest curriculum renewal project in Alberta's history. This work starts with the release of the draft kindergarten to grade 6 curriculum in the coming weeks. This step leads us towards classroom validation in the fall. prior to the province-wide implementation the following year. By 2024-25 school year, we expect that an entirely new kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum will be taught in Alberta schools. We have set aside funding to support this work, which is included in the Department of Education operations line from this fiscal plan. I have also made it clear that future funding for curriculum implementation will not come out of the classroom. Now, moving on to the 2021 capital plan, I'm pleased to say that Alberta's government continues to invest in schools. We are earmarking $2.1 billion over the next 3 years to maintain existing schools, work on previously announced projects, expand the modular program, and support 14 additional school projects. The capital plan provides $140 million over 3 years to support the continued implementation of the modular program to address the most urgent needs for additional spaces across this province. This is a significant increase over last year's 3-year budget target. This year alone, we will allot $90 million, which is the highest ever single year investment in the modular program. We will also continue to invest in playgrounds, which is an important initiative for me as well. Looking specifically at operations and maintenance and capital maintenance and renewal, flexibility and capitalization remain key to aspects of these programs. $651 million will go to operations and maintenance, which is the same as last year, and $103 million is for capital maintenance and renewal. I will also remind you that this is coming on the heels of last year's accelerated capital maintenance and renewal dollars announced last spring. An additional $250 million program was accelerated hundreds of projects and supported thousands of jobs. I'd like to now briefly touch upon the department's administration budget. The ministry is committed to finding efficiencies and saving money. While approximately 1% of Alberta's education budget supports the administration of the Department of Education, we are showing leadership in reducing administrative costs. This allows us to push more dollars to school authorities to provide to frontline services. Looking at next steps over the coming weeks, as I mentioned earlier, the department will be reviewing student learning support funding. School authorities will receive their funding profiles by the end of March once those decisions are made. To conclude, I will stress again that all school authorities will maintain.
Ministers, your time has now elapsed. Thank you. For the hour that follows, members of the official opposition and the minister may speak. The timer will be set in 20-minute intervals so that you are aware of time. Members are asked to advise the chair at the beginning of their rotation if they wish to combine time with the ministers. Ms. Hoffman?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd be happy to share my time with the minister if she's comfortable doing so at this point.
Minister, would you like to share time?
I would prefer to do the block timing.
No worries. Ms. Hoffman?
Yeah, let's try that for this block, and maybe the minister will reconsider for the next, but here we go. I want to begin by acknowledging that 6 hours will go fast, and we've been through estimates before once in this format and once in an even more truncated form in the legislature, and I appreciate all the work that's gone in through department officials and the minister's office in preparing for today, and I'm hoping that we can really dig into some of this information, particularly given the change in how the lockdown was done this year and the embargoed information shared. Typically, we would have officials, including some of the folks who are in the room today, come and brief the opposition members during the budget lockdown, but that wasn't done this year. We did have a brief period of time with some finance officials, so there is going to be probably more concrete information required this year in this process than we've required in the past. So definitely through you, Madam Chair, and through the minister, would love to hear direct, concrete answers from some of the folks in the department with regard to some of the questioning that I'll be engaging here right away. And I also want to say that I understand that not everyone will have every answer at the top of their information available today, and that written response is certainly welcome as well, and ideally, well, it would best inform and support democracy if we had those responses prior to being asked to consider voting on the actual budget itself. So I want to start by, all of those understandings before we really start digging into this more deeply. And I want to say, just in terms of framing, one of the pieces of information we were able to acquire during the lockdown was the hard number for how many were actually enrolled this year in schools. Normally, I think that information is reported from school divisions to the minister's office at the end of September and then relayed to the public shortly thereafter in the fall. But this year, I understand that the minister extended that time for reporting back the number of students until December, and when I checked last week, I don't think that the actual numbers were on the department website yet. There were still projections that were there. So I know that the projection was 715,000 and that the actual is 706 based on what we were notified of when we asked this questions of finance officials in the lockdown, and that the projections for next year are 726,000. As the minister noted, a significant decrease between what was projected for enrollment this year and the number of students who actually showed up. But an even bigger increase in the upcoming year for the number of students who are projected to be registered in school. And I also want to acknowledge that when I say in school, it doesn't mean it needs to be in the physical building. It's students who are registered in a variety of ways for educational opportunities, including many this year who are registered for remote online learning. I know that there are many high schools, for example, where in excess of 50% of the student population has registered for online learning through, well, I guess we won't, emergency remote learning through a variety of different online mechanisms. Most are still tied back to the students. So I do want to acknowledge that that there is going to be a significant increase in the number of students going to school this next year in whatever format that might be. And many Albertans have expressed to me their deep concerns that this budget doesn't take that increased enrollment into consideration. The first document I'd like to begin with is the business plan for this year. And the business plan, in my experiences prior and generally as an Albertan, I read this document as a commitment or a contract or even a covenant between the stewards of the province, the government, and the representatives of the government, and the people of Alberta who are receiving the services. And I have to say that my jaw dropped when I saw that it was only 2 pages this year. In the past, it's been 11. So even if you count the one table of numbers, this year it's 3. So that's a huge reduction in the amount of information that government is setting forward in their commitment and their transparency, in their objectives and their key measures from where we've been in the past. And not just in the past under PC governments or NDP governments, but even in the past under this UCP government and this minister. This is a significant erosion of transparency and, I would argue, democracy. So I guess one of the questions I have is why is the minister moving so aggressively to really truncate and fail to shine a light on what her actual priorities are for education as we move forward? Because it definitely, when you simply compare last year's business plan to this year's business plan, there's a huge erosion of that transparency and intern trust. I always like to compare the last business plan to this one. I think that that's a good habit to get into, because not only does this business plan tell you what the government cares about for this year, but it tells you what they've decided not to prioritize, that they used to prioritize. So something that really stood out to me is that previously there were 4 key objectives. There are still 4 key objectives, but one of the 4 key objectives previously, even last year, was funding the education system to provide learning opportunities that enable student success. And the fact that that's been removed, that's not a key objective for the Ministry of Education, I think is a very significant disservice to the minister, to the department, to everyone who receives this information, and ultimately to students who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of education. So just to reflect on some of the changes to the key objectives section, 1.1 is now about implementing the curriculum as opposed to compiling it, fine. 1.2 is similar to a previous one as well. 1.3 is new. So 1.2 was around provincial assessments. 1.3 is now also about provincial assessments. And 1.4 used to be 1.3 essentially. So there is a doubling down on provincial assessments, standardized testing, and an elimination of the minister's objective around funding the education system to provide learning opportunities that enable student success. I guess the question there would be, Who told you that it shouldn't be a priority to enable student success, through you, Madam Chair? Who said that it was appropriate for us to, at this time, when very few Albertans, including the minister, are focused on provincial assessments? I appreciate that the minister did respond to calls from parents, from students, from staff groups, as well as the official opposition around removing some of the stress around provincial standardized tests, including diploma exams this year. But now the minister's saying that she's only going to focus on 4 key objectives this next year, and 2 of them are about provincial assessments, standardized testing, and that none of that focus is going to be around learning opportunities to enable student success based on her actual business plan. I think that that is a disservice to the people of Alberta. So who said that it should be a priority for us to add double focus to provincial assessment, and who said that the key objective around funding the system to enable success shouldn't exist? Because that definitely is counter to the feedback that I receive daily from students, staff, and families in this province. Also continuing on page 31 of the business plan, most students, staff, families have told me that they want an education system that provides smaller class sizes, more educational assistance, improved access to technology and digital supports. But there wasn't anything about that added. Instead, as I remarked, the modernizing provincial assessment was stated as being the key priority. So if there are only 4 key priorities and only a 2-page business plan, that seems to reflect what the members' focus, what the minister's focus is on. The minister did refer to stable, predictable funding, and part of the other component on that we lobbied for together when we were school board trustees was adequate. So the minister seems to have removed any reference to adequacy in terms of funding and just focused on stable and predictable. And I want to highlight that when you do that, it is absolutely stable and predictable to say, I'm not going to give you enough. I'm going to not give you enough, and I'm not going to give you enough in perpetuity. But that isn't actually what enables successful student experiences and learning opportunities. As I mentioned, we know that student enrollment is down significantly from projected. And when we asked school authorities for where their greatest enrollment reduction was, many have said kindergarten, as well as years 4 and 5 in high school. And presumably high school completion rates as a result will decrease because students are spending less time either upgrading or acquiring the requirements that are necessary for high school completion. So another question is for the minister to tell us how this was taken into consideration in performance metrics 1A, because it doesn't appear to have been in my reading of this very succinct objective as outlined by the minister. The other piece would be I have grave concerns that failing to disclose the actual enrollment until this point in the school year when we're about to embark on the 4th quarter, I don't think enables us to ensure that those students who aren't learning in school or aren't learning remotely have an opportunity to glean the education that they are entitled to. So I would like to know.
Ms. Hoffman, I'll let you finish your sentence.
Thank you. I'd like to know what's going to be done through this budget and this priority setting to ensure that that doesn't happen this next year. I think it's important that we prioritize educational experiences for students.
Thank you. And with that, we will move on to the minister for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I do want to tackle these very important questions that Member Hoffman has put forward. And I'll start with the enrollments. And as you acknowledged that there were a decrease, but I have to share with everyone here that, in fact, the projected headcount was actually higher for the 2021 school year. So I'm going to give you some actual numbers so you can see that we, in fact, haven't supported our school divisions to a very high level and continue to support them. So in the 2019-2020 school year, regular student headcount was 696,744 students. The projected headcount for 2020-21 was 715,355 students. The actual headcount, and these are regular students in public schools, independent schools, and independent ECS operators. The actual headcount for the 2020-21 year was 680,843 students. The projection for the headcount for 2020-21 21-22 year is $705,995. When we add in the home education and shared responsibility, the total number headcount students actuals for 2019-20 was 711,843. The actual headcount projection for 2020-21 was 730,030 students. Those are actually the students we funded in the 2020-21 school year, and we kept it whole. And the actual projected headcount for 21-22 is 725,955. And I guess I missed the actual headcount for 2021. And the actual headcount, even though the projection was 730,000 students, the actual headcount in 2021 was 705,917. So full 25,000 students more that we funded in the 2020-21 school year, and will continue to fund even though the projection is 725,955 in this upcoming year, 21-22 year. So as you can see, these students have been coming to school. They perhaps have gone to a different method of learning, but we are so proud of the fact that we are able to maintain funding to all the students, and in fact, have funded school divisions beyond students they didn't even have within their classrooms, that they've had full access to all those dollars. And when we look at how healthy our school divisions are in terms of their account balances, we note, and I note that they have available to them as of August 31st of 2020, $383 million in operating reserves. That was an increase of $21 million from the previous year. Even in a pandemic, our school divisions were able to put away dollars to support their students because they know that these students are going to require the best possible services. And in capital reserves, they were able to increase their capital reserves year over year by $13.4 million. This indicates that we have been supporting our school divisions at the highest level possible to ensure that they are able to meet the demands. As I said, year over year, we've actually been funding the 730,000 students in this current year, even though we've only had 705,000 attending. When we look at the business plan, and give me a moment to move to my business plan, I just want to correct an inaccuracy. Our business plan is actually 4 pages long, not 2. And I would have preferred to have put everything in that I would have wanted to put in this business plan. I wanted to include all of the measures from last year and beyond to show what an excellent education system we actually do have. We are looking at all of these items that are listed here, all of these measurements and all of these outcomes. And the very first outcome is Alberta students are successful. Outcome 1, Alberta students are successful. The key objectives are clearly listed under there. Implementing new curriculum, reforming provincial assessments, modernizing the provincial student assessment, increasing opportunities for hands-on learning and experiential learning. And then we go to outcome 2, which is First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students in Alberta are successful, and so on. But we actually have and are continuing to track all the other 22 items that are here. The new Treasury Board and Finance Business Plan standards have pushed ministries to focus on the strategic and leave operational concerns to other internal planning and reporting documents. So that's why they're not specifically listed in this document. I would have preferred to have the expanded version, but unfortunately, due to the Treasury Board and Finance direction, this is what we have to place into the into this new plan. We can see that students are increasingly targeting success. We are, as an education system, wanting that trajectory to move further and further up the line. I hope that one day we can have 100% as targets. I would love to see every single student in this province receive 100% in every measurement. And so that is what we are aiming for, continual improvement. The assessments that were stressed by Member Hoffman is just of course, something that we're hearing from parents. They want to know that their students are being assessed to ensure that they are actually learning what they need to learn at the time they need to learn it. So again, this I would love to have had an expanded business plan, but unfortunately, due to the Treasury Board requirements, they have limited us to these numbers. Stable, predictable funding is absolutely what school divisions wanted. And if I can refer you to the fiscal plan, pages 102 and 103 of the fiscal plan, you will see that we are in fact maintaining education funding. I'd like to draw your attention to the graph on the page 103, which again shows that historically we are year over year spending more in operating expense, which is more greatly significant than the actual inflation and enrollment numbers that you see in front of you. So again, we are continuing to spend unprecedented dollars to ensure that our schools are having all of the resources that they require and access to all of the resources they require. In this year, of course, it was unprecedented, and we spent a great deal of dollars in terms of ensuring that our schools were safe. And that amounted to about $1 billion overall that schools were spending to ensure that they had the supports necessary to deal with the COVID pandemic. High school completion was something else that Member Hoffman was asking about. So high school completion is important for entry to the labor force and post-secondary programs. And so while the majority of students complete high school within 3 years of entering grade 10, the 5-year rate for our performance measure recognizes that it may take more time for some students to finish high school. So in 2018-2019, 84.9% of students completed high school within 5 years of entering grade 10. Based on 2014 to 2015 to 2018-2019 data, the high school completion rate has improved over time. This indicates that parents and students and schools continue to recognize that high school completion is important for students' future success. Of the students who complete high school in 5 years, most, about 91% in the 2018-2019, completed in 3 years. The 3-year rate is also highly correlated to the 5-year rate, which makes the 3-year rate a reliable predictor of the 5-year rate in subsequent years. So projections indicate that the 5-year rate is likely to increase by 1 or 2 percentage points over the next few years. In addition to those who earn a high school diploma or certificate, Alberta's high school completion rate also includes students who enter an Alberta post-secondary institution or an apprenticeship program within 5 years of entering grade 10. This acknowledges that students have completed the high school courses they need to continue their education in a post-secondary program. Another group comprises those who have earned credits in the minimum of 5 grade 12 courses, including 1 language arts diploma examination course and 3 other diploma.
Minister, I'll let you finish your sentence there quickly.
So, and 3 other diploma examination courses. I do have more to go on, but that's fine. Thank you.
Wonderful. And with that, we'll go on to the next 20-minute block. And I will ask again, do you wish to combine your time?
If the minister wants to continue as we have, I'm fine with that. If she wants to combine time, I'm certainly happy to do that as well. So I'm happy to comply with her wish on this.
Minister?
Go with the block.
And so just to confirm what I stated at the beginning around the actuals this year, I rounded. I said 706,000, not 705,917, is reflective of what the minister just stated, and that next year there will be projected 726,000 students. So an increase of 20,000 students across the province without any planned increase in investment to support those students. And it would be great in future years members if we could have the officials attend the lockup, as was a longtime tradition, either remotely or in person. The one piece that was different information, though, is that we were told by finance officials that the projection was $715,000 for this current year. So if that information was incorrect, I think it doubly underlines the need to have officials from the appropriate departments available to answer questions on budget day through lockdown. We used to have performance metrics tied, and I do want to reiterate, the business plan, I'm talking about the core objectives, the business plan objectives. It's one double-sided page, that's 2 pages. I know that there is an org chart and that there is the one-page summary of operations lifted from other documents, but the actual business plan, as I believe it to be, is 2 pages this year. It's one double-sided page. We used to have performance metrics through the business plan tied to safe, caring, and healthy learning environments, and I would say, why isn't this a priority for measurement this year? Why isn't the minister showing Albertans that she cares about student safety and well-being through her actual commitment to them, through the budget, through the business plan? And why aren't we measuring success against this in the upcoming year? There used to be outcomes related to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students and their success. There were 5 key objectives, including strengthening education programming and policies for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students, ensuring First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students have success in their provincial education system, or access, rather, to the provincial education system, and so on. This year, there is one measure about high school completion rates. That's it. So, Madam Chair, what do you think the downgrading of this reporting and accountability says to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Albertans and to all Albertans? And is it any wonder that partners like the Northwest Territories are distancing themselves from our education system when it seems to be such an erosion of what once was defined commitment objectives and measured against success on those objectives? There was a report recently in the NNSL media where the Beaufort Delta District Education Council Assistant Superintendent informed board members of the plan during the second day of their February 17th, 18th annual general meeting. He said it isn't official yet, a decision has not been finally made, but it's something you should probably be aware of at this stage, he told them. He added that the underlying logic behind making the change had been the direction of the United Conservative Party government here in the education system of Alberta, and he said it's been disappointing from a territorial perspective. It's not, this is a quote, it's not inclusive for Indigenous perspectives or Indigenous ways of life. It's very conservative. I don't think it's reflective of the values here in the territories, and certainly not what we value here at our district. He said that BC had done a big curriculum revamp. It's all public, it's online and competency-based. We think it's great, and we're the shift in Alberta has brought it to the forefront. So that's definitely something that has been brought to my attention, and I understand that it hasn't been brought to the minister's attention, but I think that changes through the way curriculum's done, changes in the engagement with partners, putting people with the pen who don't reflect the values of Albertans generally and the values of our partners and other educational authorities who've been part of this highlights the lack of trust and confidence that this government and under this ministry, under the leadership of our current minister, is reflective on those priorities. And I would say that the business plan doubles that down. The business plan erosion of, and I get that there's a title under Outcome 2 that says First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students in Alberta are successful, but the key objectives certainly don't reflect the kind of core competencies that we want to see in terms of greater outcomes. And the performance metric that I was referring to is the only metric around high school completion. So there used to be more metrics related to student success. There are still some listed objectives, but in terms of actual things that we're measuring to be held accountable to. I was in Treasury Board and Finance yesterday for the afternoon. And I did ask specifically about the business plans, because the business plans for education and health really did stand out to me as a significant deviation from the transparency that we used to hold. And while it's been said here that it was direction from Treasury Board and Finance, it was made very clear yesterday in committee on the record that it was an encouragement to narrow and focus business plans. So an encouragement to narrow and focus from an 11-page document to something more succinct. I understand that. I think that the minister absolutely has the authority to push back and to say, it's really important that we are consistent in what we're measuring and how we're being accountable to the people of Alberta. And also, I think it's appropriate for the minister to do something more than one double-sided page when others have certainly done more than one double-sided page. This is a significant number of dollars, and it's also a significant number of people who are impacted by this budget and the decisions around the minister. So in the budget briefing, when we asked about the actual enrollment, I mentioned that we were told it was 706. I don't think that's the number that the minister confirmed. Oh no, 705,917. So that's fine. And some officials told us that the budget is based on the projection of 726,000 students, which again means that increase of more than 20,000 this year. But if we take the consolidated budget claims at their word, that means that 20,000 more students without any more funding. So can the minister tell us how she expects this many additional students to be effective in their learning without any additional support? And let's remember that what happened just a few short days after the last budget estimates went through the Assembly, the minister took to Twitter and notified Albertans that more than 20,000 educational workers were being laid off. And that was just days after the minister pledged in the House that educational budgets would remain intact and that students who needed educational assistance would have those available to them, and that of course wasn't the reality. Then the minister claimed that the layoffs were only temporary and that the staff would be rehired. But on page 182 of the fiscal plan, again, fiscal plan page 182, we can see very clearly that there will be 37,226 certified staff. So that's a net reduction of 337 from pre-COVID staffing levels. So you'd have to compare last year's fiscal plan to this year's fiscal plan to see that number, because the government didn't highlight that in their presentation of it this year. But that is a net reduction of certified staff, so teachers, of 337. And then in terms of non-certified staff, 25,281, which is a reduction of over 1,800 non-certified staff. And again, most of them presumably educational assistants. So this is the change from the pre-COVID staffing levels. So there will be 20,000 more students and more than 2,000 fewer staff. How can we possibly justify having that many more learners and that many fewer adults there to support them in their learning? Everyone knows that this has been an incredibly challenging learning year, this current school year as well as last year's school year, that there have been learning gaps, social emotional gaps, mental health struggles, and that this current school year as well as the end of last school year has been unlike any other. So when student numbers are going up and student needs are going up, why has the minister chosen to reduce the number of teachers and support staff who will be there to support these students through their learning? This certainly can't be what parents are asking for. They can't say, what we want is more rigorous standardized testing and fewer staff to help students learn those competencies. I really have to say the main lobbying point I've heard consistently over the last year around assessment is the need to be more flexible and responsive to students, and to have increased staffing supports and smaller class sizes to support students in learning. So those are a couple of the points I wanted to highlight at this point. One other that I'm going to touch on is board funding. The minister has told school boards that none of their allocations will decrease in the upcoming school year, so I'd like her to confirm that. The minister has also told boards that they can receive additional funding if they have additional enrollment. Can the minister confirm that she also told this to authorities and also commit to that on the record, that there will be no reductions and that increased student count will result in increased student funding? And lastly, the minister presented a consolidated budget that is flat. So if the minister is telling us that she can have a flat global budget, that she can ensure that nobody receives less and that some will receive more, that math doesn't add up. So what's missing here, Minister, and how can all three of those things be true at the same time?
Wonderful timing, Ms. Hoffman. And now on to Minister LaGrange.
Thank you for those questions, and I'll just draw Member Hoffman back to a number that I had originally stated in my first round of questions, which is the 2020-21 school year projected head count, total projected student head count of 730,030 students that we are actually currently funding in this current year. So in 2020-21, this current school year, we're actually funding 730,000 students, and yet there was only 705,917 that actually attended by our actual head count. While the projection for next year, for the 21-22 year, is 725,966, that is still well below the 730,030 students that we are currently funding this year. And I'm proud to say that we're going to continue funding those 730,000 students to school divisions and providing those extra dollars. As I said earlier, school divisions have very healthy reserves, and I'm also proud of that. And the fact is that they're projecting to use less of their reserves in this upcoming school year, even in comparison to what they had projected last year. As I said earlier, while they had projected, early accounts to me was that they were going to be using approximately $60 million in the previous school year of reserves, but in fact, $21 million more were added to the reserve coffers. They went from $363 million to $383 million in operating reserves, and again, an additional $13 million in capital from 208 to 221. So I'm very proud of the fact that school divisions are well resourced to meet the needs of their own local realities. When we look at the fact that there were fewer students, many of those school divisions chose to allocate their resources differently in terms of their staffing. As Member Hoffman knows, being a former school board trustee herself, that school boards and their administration make staffing decisions. They are the ones that, even with the resources that they had, made the decisions that to allocate those teacher and non-certificated staff. I can tell you that in projected difference in 2020, from 2019 to 2021, school boards added an additional 15 FTE certificated teachers, whereas in the same time period, they did decrease by 1,557 non-certificated staff, EAs and bus drivers. The decrease in non-certificated staffing is primarily attributed to school board's planned decrease in non-certificated instructional staff, such as educational assistants and classroom aides, as a result of the significantly lower than expected enrollment in non-mandatory pre-kindergarten and kindergarten programs, including program unit funding children in 2020-21. This drop is expected to be temporary as the system prepares for the new school year. This decrease in non-certificated instructional staff is particularly evident amongst Edmonton school boards, public and Catholic, which accounted for approximately 44% of the provincial decrease in non-certificated instructional staff. And as I indicated, while we funded for 730,000 students, that did not materialize. There was actually 705,000 students. All those additional resources stayed within school divisions so that they could address the needs of their communities. Because, as Member Hoffman would know, they are in the best position to address those needs. When I look at the comments of the Northwest Territories, I'm happy to report to Member Hoffman that I had a really great conversation with Minister Simpson yesterday morning. And Minister Simpson really, and I'm sure Member Hoffman does not want to imply that he would be lying to me, but Minister Simpson reiterated that as part of their regular 5-year, every 5 years, the renewal of the contract comes up and they will be looking at their curriculum. And what he said to me is that he doesn't know where they're going with the curriculum. In fact, he is quite happy to hear that in our curriculum, our updates to the curriculum, the new curriculum that will be coming out, that we are going to have very, very strong First Nations, Métis and Inuit content, that we will have probably the most comprehensive curriculum across Canada in terms of reconciliation and working towards meeting the demands within that area, that we are going to have content on residential schools. He was so happy to hear all of that. He said, I would be the first to know if there was any change that they would be making. But right now, he said, this is all speculation. There is no truth to this. And so I just want to assure Member Hoffman that the Northwest Territories and Minister Simpson will in fact contact me should there be any changes in their thought pattern around which curriculum they will use. But he was so appreciative of all of the information I was sharing with him, and he is really looking forward to seeing that new curriculum when it is released here shortly. In the fiscal plan, again, I spoke to this earlier, that I would love to have, and in fact, I did submit a very enhanced, robust business plan that was returned to me to trim down and truncate. But I am happy to tell you that our department staff are currently developing an online table that lists all of the performance measures beyond those included in the business plan with current and historical results, as well as a 5-year trend. This information will be posted on our Alberta Education website for public access. I have felt very strongly that we need to be very transparent with our public. And this is one of the ways we will be transparent. We will make sure that all of that information is out there so that parents and the general public can look and see year over year, have we gained ground? Have we lost ground? We need to ensure that the public is very, very aware. This is something also that I felt very strongly was needed to be done in terms of the curriculum development. We didn't want the members who are part of the curriculum working groups or part of the advisors or part of the of any portion of developing the curriculum. We wanted every single one of those members to be listed, to be accounted for, and the process to be very, very transparent. So anything that you will see in the curriculum development is transparent. I'm very happy to say, as I indicated earlier, that we have got a very robust development process and transparency process, and we will continue to do so because it is very, very important that we are accountable to the general public. When I look at moving forward here, one of your other questions was on board funding. And yes, no school authority will see less operational funding. And we can do this through the $130 million in mitigation funding that we are going to provide to school boards. Again, I remind you that we will actually be funding, if the projections actually turn out to be true, the 725,000 students, that we will actually be funding approximately 5,000 more than we are currently funding 5,000 less than we are currently funding right now. Because as I said earlier, we are currently funding 730,000 students. And so it is very important for us to ensure that those students are, of course, now we have a new model that has provided sustainable, predictable funding, which is something school boards wanted. And I know that Member Hoffman, when she was a trustee, really advocated for sustainable, predictable funding. So under the weighted moving average, which is how we are able to get this sustainable, predictable funding, Alberta's education funding model frees up resources by reducing red tape and administrative costs while giving school boards the autonomy and the flexibility to invest in classrooms based on their students' needs. Apart from the cap on system administration, none of the grants in the new model are targeted, so school authorities have the maximum flexibility to allocate their resources to the best meet the needs of their students. An efficient and sustainable funding model for K-12 education ensures that all schools in Alberta have adequate resources to deliver programs in an equitable way. This is very important, that it is equitable. The previous funding formula wasn't flexible enough to contain costs and involved too much administration. It was unsustainable, as I referred you to earlier on page 103 of the fiscal plan. You could see that exponential growth where operational spending was way higher than in...
Thank you, Minister. And back to Ms. Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to reinforce that when the minister talks about projecting 730,000 and that 24,000 fewer showed up and celebrates, I too am relieved that funding wasn't clawed back. I am, however, deeply concerned that 24,000 students essentially dropped out who were anticipated to be in school this year, whether that was dropping out of kindergarten programming, whether that was dropping out of years 4 or 5, or whether that was at any point in between. So what is being done, and I think I asked this in the first exchange, what is being done through this budget and through policy that will feed into this budget to ensure that all Alberta students are receiving the education that I believe that they should be entitled to. And again, to reiterate, what it was that we were lobbying for together was adequate, sustainable, predictable funding through our individual advocacy as well as our shared advocacy through associations like the Alberta School Boards Association. That adequate piece is fundamental because perpetually underfunding or perpetually underproviding for those in one's care would be seen as negligence if it was within a household and it was your own family. Even if you were being sustainable and predictable in the fact that you were under providing for your family, that would not be seen as success. Adequacy is fundamental to ensuring that we properly support students in their learning and their success. I'm thrilled to hear that the department and under the minister's leadership did actually create a far more thorough business plan, and it's lovely that it's planning on being posted. I think that it should be tabled in the Assembly if this is what fed into the actual decisions that went into this. So I'm hoping for confirmation that the minister will table the enhanced business plan she referred to prior to any decision being requested by the members of the Assembly around approval of the budget. I also want to highlight that the minister says that any school authorities who have increased enrollment will see increased funding, and that includes, I'm sure, independent and charter schools as well. There is a small contingency. I appreciate that there is one, though. Is the minister confident that she can fund increased enrollment in a variety of different potential places without taking any money away from existing school authorities? And the main reason why I ask this is because this is the first time that I can remember, and I'm happy to be corrected. I'm sure Brad has an even longer memory than I do about the actual funding manual and the one-pagers get provided to boards. But in my experience for more than a decade, within a day, sometimes 2 at worst for some boards, everyone had their one-pagers. They knew what the funding manual was going to be, they knew what their projections were, and they were able to act on those. And this is the very first year that the funding manual and the one-pagers will be shared with those who the minister says are entrusted to make the decisions closest to the student and who are in the best position to be able to do so, a full month after the budget was presented, the rolled up provincial budget. So it's very difficult for many school authorities to take the minister at her word on this when last year they actually did receive their one-pagers and then their funding was cut substantially. So through you, Madam Chair, to the minister and her officials, what is going on that this is, for the first time that I can recall, the new standard, that we're not actually going to tell those who are being required to implement these budget decisions what their budget is until a full month after it's being considered, and that we're not giving this information out prior to asking members of the Assembly to vote on it. It definitely flies in the face of transparency and accountability, and it is causing significant angst for many folks. So those traditional one-pagers, again, have been shared within the same day. So why isn't that happening this year? Why aren't we telling schools, and including school boards, how much their allocation will be exactly before we're asking this to pass its way through the Assembly? Now I'm going to go to the main estimates for a little bit, and I'm going to focus on page 73 first. So on page 73, there is a reference to how many staff. My first question is around 1.1 Minister's Office. I see that the estimate is for flat funding this year, so I would love to have a summary of how many political staff and how many administrative staff are under line item 1.1, and how that compares to the current fiscal year, moving to the next fiscal year. And why the forecast below budget was in place for the current year. I didn't write down the line item. Learning support funding. Let's talk about learning support funding, which is 3.2 over, it's $300 million essentially over budget forecast. So what happened there? That's significantly more even than, it's more than even what the federal funding was that was passed on to the minister to pass on to school authorities. And why are we now cutting the budget in this next year over forecast? I know it's not over budget, but it's over what's actually being spent this year by $257 million. That is a significant reduction over what's being spent this year to support student learning. Again, we know that student needs are going to go up in this upcoming school year because we will have more students. We will have more educational gaps from the last year and a half of change and responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we also know that we'll have more mental health needs as well. And I do see that transportation is seeing an increase over forecast, but it's still a cut from where it was in budget. And I know that the opening remarks highlighted that it did go up under the last budget, but that definitely, the budget and the forecast don't line up there because, again, the actual forecast is down. And I'm assuming at least part of that is because so many students dropped out. Again, as highlighted by the minister, 24,000 fewer students than anticipated. So certainly far fewer are on the bus as well as with the increase of remote home learning. Again, fewer students will be on buses. But if you look at the forecast to estimate, there is an increase, but it's essentially flat between budget and estimate. So are we not anticipating that we will have more demands when it comes to transportation? And transportation is something that I know that there was a review of this last fall, and I know Member Neudorf, who's here in the room today, was a part of that and I believe chaired that process. So where are we at on the policy assumptions that are driving this budget? What are the policy assumptions that relate to transportation that are being considered in this budget? And typically we'd again have officials available on budget day to talk to MLAs and answer questions during the lockup, and I highlighted that that wasn't the case. And one of the questions that I would have asked again this year, consistent with things that I've asked in the past, is what are the changes to different types of program funding, including PUF? So have there been any changes made to the years that one's eligible, the ages that one is eligible, the number of hours available for programming, and the standards and benchmarks in relation to that? I know that there were significant changes made to that last year. Have we reversed some of those? Have we learned from the negative impacts of those, including the age criteria and eliminating that additional support for kindergarten, something that we know many parents don't know that their child has an opportunity to benefit from focused supports until they are actually in kindergarten, because that's the time when professionals often engage with students and see where the gaps and opportunities are. I guess the last one I'll mention under this block time is around the bridge funding that was put in place last year. I understand that there was a new budget funding formula that was set. We haven't seen what the funding manual is for this year, so it's hard to know what those changes are between the changes that were made last year and the changes for this year. That bridge funding was fundamental in ensuring that the negative impacts of the model didn't have lasting impacts for all school divisions or the vast majority of school divisions. So I'd love to know what happened to that bridge funding this year and what assumptions are being put into place to ensure that we don't see a significant contraction this year or next year in terms of the supports that are being seen, particularly in school divisions that are growing significantly. Has the bridge funding been sustained for this year? And if not, how is that gap going to be made up? Is there actually a funding manual and a funding formula that we can have some understanding of how this money is going to be distributed and pushed out to school authorities? Because we appreciate the presentation that's being made here. I appreciated the presentation that was made last year, and then just a few days after the budget was actually passed last year, there were significant cuts and clawbacks. So I think it's important for us to have some clarity, some transparency, and some certainty around the bridge funding. And there were significant cutbacks because there were announcements of laying off more than 20,000 educational staff, and that was done again for May and June.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. And now back to Minister LaGrange.
Thank you so much, and thanks for those great questions. And so I'm really proud to say that adequate sustainable funding was something we always advocated for when we were trustees, and I'm glad that Member Hoffman remembers that, because that's exactly what school divisions have. And in fact, I have several quotes from school division officials, and she would know the president of the College of Alberta School Superintendents. And a quote on Budget 2021, "We appreciate the minister's commitment to invest in specific areas where ongoing specialized supports for students are required." Brandy from ASCA, the Alberta School Council Association, said that Budget 2021 prioritizes student success and supports for students with additional learning needs, priorities identified by Alberta school councils and parents. And Lori Jess from the ASBA, who's the president of ASBA, the Alberta School Boards Association, says she appreciates that education funding will be maintained and that boards will be provided with the flexibility and autonomy to ensure dollars go where they are most needed. I actually had a great meeting with Zone 1, and you probably remember Zone 1. That's our northern school divisions up Grand Prairie and Peace Wapiti and Northland School Division, et cetera. And Zone 1, they were so supportive of the direction that we went with the Budget 2021. I had so many individuals, trustees, thanking our government for keeping the funding the way it was. They were so supportive, and I just want to reiterate that adequate sustainable funding has worked really well. The weighted moving average actually was beneficial to school divisions, particularly as they saw enrollment enrollment drop this year. And so they were able to see that weighted moving average was to their benefit. And as I indicated earlier, we're funding 730,000 students. And in fact, when only 705,000 were in attendance. And we anticipate, if the numbers turn out to be correct, 725,000 students, which is still less than the 730,000 students we continue to fund. So as you indicated, I'm glad that you are happy that there is a robust business plan, because there is, and there will continue to be. And that will be on our website very soon. So I will look forward to you having a look at that on the website, and then being able to see how we are moving the education system forward. Enrollment was a question that you were asking about. And again, I highlight the fact that in Budget 21, we will be providing more than $130 million in provincial mitigation funding, COVID mitigation funding, which allows school authorities to support safe learning environments for all of our students. We heard very loudly and clearly from education partners to hold harmless, and that's exactly what we did. The profiles and the funding manual, certainly, as I will draw your attention to page 73, the learning support funding, which you indicated earlier. But I will draw your attention on the portion that is $1,356,000,090, which is up 40 million from the previous learning support funding budget. Because of the fact that we had a new funding model, and it was something that I and my department had indicated we would continue to review that funding model. It was new, so we knew that perhaps there'd be refinements that needed to be made. In this particular area, because of the fact that we had students with specialized learning needs that were impacted by COVID, and the fact that we wanted to examine these funding envelopes a little bit more thoroughly, I added an additional $40 million in that envelope. And because of that need to continue to look at that and how it will be dispersed, it was felt very strongly that profiles and the funding manual, it would be best to get them accurate. And so we had, that will be brought out by the end of March 31st of 2021, this March. Every school division will get its profile, and they will have access to the funding manual, the updated funding manual. And I know that this is very important to school divisions, but I have to also remind you that that is one of the benefits of having the new funding model, is that school divisions will actually have the profiles before school begins. They can do that in-depth planning that they want to do. They are able to allocate their resources. They're able to hire staff and know securely that they actually have those dollars available to them, which wasn't in the past, because that was something that occurred after they had the September 30th student count. So this is something that we heard very loudly from our education partners, that they are very pleased with having access to those funding profiles so early so that they can make those critical decisions for their school divisions, is something that they really, really benefit from. And I, spoke with, again, Zone 1 just yesterday. I've been in contact with the education partners, and they are quite in agreement that March 31st, they're happy to receive those funding profiles and the funding manual by March 31st, which gives them lots and lots of time to be able to make their staffing decisions, as well as all the other decisions for their upcoming school year budget. On main estimates, let me turn to page 73, the learning support funding, which is something that you had drawn attention to, as to why the forecast over estimate is there's a difference of $257,088. So the Learning Support Funding Grant supports specialized learning needs or groups of students who may require additional supports from school authorities. So this includes the Specialized Learning Support Grant, the program unit funding, English as a second language and in French language supports, refugee student grants, the First Nations Métis and Inuit grant, the socioeconomic status grant, the geographic grant, and the school nutrition grant. So government is very committed to ensuring that all students and all children with specialized learning needs receive the additional support necessary in order to build a solid foundation for the future, learning and success. Alberta Education will continue to examine the funding under the Learning Support Funding grants in order to ensure that the most vulnerable students and children are supported. So under COVID-related funding adjustments, there was $298 million in that COVID-related funding adjustment. There was an increase, $248.6 million decrease for schools to reopen safely. There was $39.4 million decrease to frontline education workers' wage top-up as part of the government's critical worker benefit program, and $10 million decrease for the purchase of personal protective equipment and other resources to support return to in-person learning for 2020-21 school year. The other funding adjustments of $40.9 million, there was an increase to enhance the existing funding for specialized learning supports, and that includes that whole envelope, which includes the program unit funding, as well as all those others that I just mentioned, which is expected to further support our education of the most vulnerable students within our communities. So again, that is where that additional $40 million has been added to the overall funding of that envelope, and I look very forward to bringing forward more details on how that will be dispersed in the coming weeks. On the transportation piece, let me just flip to the correct page. So transportation is provided for services to approximately 300,000 students across the province. The transportation grant is held at the enhanced level from the 2019-2020 funding. And it is, and I'll just remind you that in 2019-2020, we had increased that grant by $15 million. So again, transportation, very, very important to school authorities and school divisions. There is also, as you had stated, the Transportation Task Force, which I have received the report. I thank the members of that task force. They did an excellent job. They have provided me with a report that has short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. and recommendations. And I am looking forward to bringing that forward in the next little, in the short term. But suffice it to say that we do have very strong support for transportation, and we will continue to have strong support for transportation. I'm looking here to see that there is continued support in the area.
Thank you, Minister LaGrange. And with that, we will move on to our first block of the Government Caucus. And up first, we have Ms. Glasgow.
So, Minister, I just want to start off by saying thank you very much for being with us today and for all of your department staff. I know putting a budget together certainly isn't easy work, and all of your department officials should be proud of the work that they've done. I want to also say thank you to you for your continued engagement with my constituents. I know the people of Brooks Medicine Hat definitely appreciate that. You've not only been in my constituency, even to some of the rural areas in my constituency, but you keep a constant tab on things that are going on in Brooks Medicine Hat, and you're always available to speak to them, which I know is much, much appreciated. So I am going to ask you some questions about the curriculum review and rollout that is coming. And which is on page 31 of the business plan, key objective 1.1. It's stated to be implement new curriculum, including a validation process with volunteer school authorities to gather feedback. So you and I both know, Minister, and everybody at this table, that our government was quite critical of the previous government for their ideological curriculum, with most of it being done in secret, of course, not knowing who is part of that. It seemed to be more focused on change, being agents of change, comrades, if you will, rather than teaching children the foundations that will have them be successful in the future. I know that with my constituents, they felt that this was a continued attack on the rights of parents, as well as a continued attack by the previous government, an insistence that things need to change. Progress for progress' sake, rather than looking at what works and what has been proven to work, and which is, of course, getting our students ready for success. So we, in our platform, I'm looking at page 57 of our platform, where we promise to end the focus on discovery or inquiry learning and constructivism, focusing on proven foundational competencies, and broadened our consultations, including a wider range of perspectives from parents, teachers, and subject matter experts. So I want to just thank you for the work that you've done on that so far. I do look forward to seeing those changes. I have to say as well that this focus on developing foundational competencies is very important, as we know that it's time for in this economic recession, in this time where things are quite different, we need to make sure that students have what they need and the tools that they need to be successful in the long run, to be employed. I'm also happy to see something that one of my friends actually advocated for, which is consent being taught in the curriculum. I know that this is something that I heard from my constituents as well, that it's very important that we teach about this as part of our sexual education curriculum, and I know that the Premier was very supportive of that, as well as yourself. And this, actually, a personal friend of mine was one of the advocates for that very early on. So I'm glad to hear from you and have heard from you that this will be a continuing conversation within that. So, Minister, I have a series of questions, and because we're doing block time, I'm just going to kind of fire them at you. There's about 5, just to give you a heads up. I'm sorry. So my questions are, and of course I'm focusing on page 31 of the business plan document with key objective 1.1. Can you please tell us what the budget for the curriculum review process is, and what line item that actually falls under? The second question would be, what feedback have you received on curriculum changes so far? I'd be specifically wanting to hear from what you're hearing from parents, because of course we know that parents are the prime educators of their children and also the most important stakeholder with their children in the education curriculum and in the education process. And in budget 2021 is maintaining education funding, Can you also explain where in the budget this money came from? Because we're maintaining that 8.3 billion. And Minister, can you please give the committee an update on where in the process for the curriculum you're at? And then finally, and I'm sorry for being so long-winded, but with block time, this is unfortunately where we're at. Key objective 1.3 on page 31 of the business plan is focused on modernizing assessments. How will this benefit student learning with the new curriculum changes? So Minister, I would like to resign my time to you so that you can respond to those 5 questions and elaborate more on our platform commitment to curriculum and how that will benefit Alberta students. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you so much. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. It's a technical glitch there. So thank you so much, MLA Glasgow, for those questions. And I am very proud of the work that's been done on the curriculum. When I look at the key promise that this government made to Albertans, it was to renew the K-12 curriculum. I know it's been a long time coming, but it is certainly something that has been worth waiting for. So the provincial curriculum does define that students are expected to know, understand, and do it in every subject and in every game. Pardon me, tripping over my words. I think I'll need a glass of water. So it does define what students are expected to know, understand, and to do in each subject and grade. So I'd also like to highlight some key points of the curriculum review as this work has been happening over the last number of years. So the Curriculum Advisory Panel was appointed in 2019 to provide advice and recommendations on the development of the new kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum that emphasizes the knowledge, the skills, and the competencies students should have when they finish high school. And this is something we heard very clearly from parents and the general public, is that they want well-informed students that are very capable, highly skilled when they leave our education system. The panel provided advice and recommendations to help inform the direction for curriculum that includes globally endorsed best practices, jurisdictional research, and previous engagement feedback development of a new ministerial order on student learning that provides direction on the foundational knowledge, skills, and competencies students should have through the K-12 education system. So of course you have to have a good foundation before you can move forward on building that curriculum. So we built that strong foundation. In the winter of 2020, we broadened consultations to gather feedback on a draft ministerial order from parents, teachers, and subject matter experts. We had over 8,000 Albertans share their views through an online survey. 300 education partners, including parents, gave input through in-person and virtual engagement sessions. In August of 2020, the new ministerial order on student learning was released. This outlined the vision for student learning that students will gain the knowledge and skills to form the foundations for successful and fulfilling lives and make meaningful contributions to their communities and to the world. That's a direct quote from that ministerial order on student learning. Next, the guiding framework for the design and development of the K-12 curriculum was developed. This set a common direction, purpose, principles, and standards for the curriculum. We've had 19 individuals provide advice based on their subject matter expertise and lived experience in areas such as Francophone matters, Indigenous perspectives, literacy, social studies, science, math, and financial literacy. Last fall, the draft K-6 curriculum went to the Curriculum Working Group, which I'll remind everyone is comprised of many teachers from across the province. I believe we were well over 100 teachers. The members reviewed draft curriculum through the lens of their discipline and subject knowledge, as well as their classroom perspective. And I just want to highlight that the first draft that we received had also current teachers that were working on that draft. In the coming months, the draft K-6 curriculum will be released publicly for Albertans to review and give their feedback. And before I even go further, I wanted to also highlight that we had deans of education, as well as their faculty members, also review the K-6 draft here in the fall. And they provided their valuable feedback, which was then utilized to further refine the current K-6 draft. So once we had all of that feedback, we are coming very close to having a final version that we will be making public. As I just said, it will be public to everyone. It will be public to, it'll be on our website, and everyone will have an opportunity to provide feedback back to us on that. We are anticipating classroom validation, and we're still targeting participation in schools in September of 2021. So this September, we anticipate that province-wide, the K-6 curriculum will be implemented in this current year, or this upcoming school year. So page 103 of the fiscal plan states that Alberta's government will invest the necessary resources to support teacher learning and build English and French resources aligned to the new curriculum. We are committed to funding the curriculum implementation and supporting teachers and school divisions through this process. So regarding your question, while Alberta Education is working on the implementation, the new curriculum will come with new provincial assessments to measure the student performance on new learnings. Modernizing current provincial assessments will bring coherence to the curriculum and to curriculum assessments and to communicate student learning. Assessment and curriculum are interconnected. And aligning our assessments to our curriculum is the only way to ensure that assessments produce accurate information about our students' levels of proficiency. It will ensure Alberta students can best express their learning in provincial assessments. And as you indicated, the new curriculum will have all of those elements that you stated in terms of, consent and anti-racism and all of those other things that you have been hearing. I am so looking forward to bringing that forward. But I want to remind people that the validation process goes for a year. And what happens through the validation process, they actually try on the new curriculum. And our teachers that will be implementing that validation through that validation process will also be providing us feedback so that we can further refine the curriculum. It will not actually be finalized until 2022, when we anticipate that all of the school divisions right across this province will then implement the new curriculum in September of 2022. We anticipate that approximately 10% of school divisions across the province will take part in the validation process, and it will be voluntary. We know that COVID is still with us, and so we wanted to make sure that only those who wanted to participate can participate. And so what we have done is we will make that a voluntary process. Teachers, schools, they can choose to either implement and validate one grade, one subject, or if they want, they can do the whole K-6 within their schools. So this is something that's very important. You spoke about diversity within our new curriculum. The new curriculum will reflect the diversity, the cultural perspectives, and the history of all Albertans. It will be aligned with the Ministerial Order on Student Learning that was announced in 2020. And one of the items in the Ministerial Order on Student Learning that came directly from my Minister's Youth Advisory Council, and shout out to those great students that are in my Minister's Youth Advisory Council. They do a tremendous job and really, provide valuable feedback from the students themselves. One of the things that they said was very important for them is that they see themselves reflected in the new curriculum. So that is something that you will also see in the new curriculum. The Ministerial Order sets the vision to guide education. It updates the curriculum and strengthens the K-12 system. There's an emphasis on essential knowledge, civic virtues, and outcomes students need to succeed in school and throughout life. Isn't this what we want for all of our students? That they are able to succeed presently and in their future lives? The Ministerial Order also provides outcomes for learning to strengthen inclusion and ensure Alberta students see themselves, as I said earlier, their families and their communities in the curriculum. Students will learn about the rich heritage of Alberta and Canada while valuing the strengths of diversity. They will study significant events in provincial, national, and world history and how they impact our current world. There will be opportunities to demonstrate commitment to the common good by exercising compassion, empathy, and support for each other in our diverse societies. We will have a strong anti-racism component in our curriculum. Alberta's new kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum will continue to address concepts, topics, and issues related to anti-racism, particularly in social studies and in the wellness education portion. Concepts, topics, and issues related to anti-racism, diversity, and pluralism may also be addressed in other subject areas such as English language arts and literature. All new curriculum will be aligned with the new ministerial order on student learning announced in 2020. It sets the vision to guide education, update curriculum, and strengthen the K-12 system. As I said earlier, the new ministerial order will ensure all students see themselves, their families, and their communities in this curriculum. And this is also reinforced in the updated guiding framework for curriculum development, which provides the guidelines to ensure that the curriculum actually does help students develop respect and understanding for people.
Minister, I'll let you finish your sentence.
So that they can develop and respect and understand people of different faiths, experiences, and backgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And back to Ms. Glasgow. I believe you have about 4 minutes left.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your thorough response. And I really do appreciate the work that you've done and the work that you'll continue to do in consulting with parents. I know in my constituency that's been very important. I'm finished with my line of questioning, and I would like to resign my time to MLA Smith, if that's okay with you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Mr. Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Minister, for being willing to answer questions for us today. This budget process is an important part of what we do as we serve Albertans, and I want to thank you for being willing to go through what's going to be a grueling day, I think, for 6 hours. Wow. Now, I want to focus today a little bit of my conversation on the COVID issue and how education has been dealing with just this curveball that's been sent at them in the issue of COVID-19. You know, the education has had to address many of the stresses that have resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. Over this last year, we can see that schools were closed, causing students and teachers and parents alike to have to adapt to an online environment. And then when schools were reopened in the fall, it was education. It was up to education and to teachers and to principals and to school board officials and to superintendents to ensure that students would and could return to the classroom safely. And it was then up to the schools to implement the guidelines for the safety protocols. You know, I'm sure that it must have just been a crazy situation for you as we began rolling out the school this past fall. I know that I was talking to former colleagues and to teachers that were scrambling to try to figure out how they could cohort and how they could make sure that as they were addressing the needs of their students, and of course we know that those students are individuals and they come from a wide range of backgrounds and have a wide range of needs. How could they help to meet those needs, and could they be able to do it? And the principals were wondering, how do we get all of these parents and teachers and students all coming together in the fall to roll out this COVID-19 and address that. So, Minister, I guess I've got a couple of questions here. One, what budget line addressed this whole thing, so that as we delve into the budget here, what budget line addressed the increased costs that many school boards had when they had to face this COVID-19 as they were rolling out this coming year? And how much of the education budget is targeted towards the additional costs that are going to be incurred due to the pandemic? Can you provide us with some examples of some of those additional costs and how much money has been set aside in this budget to address those concerns? And there are going to be many. You know, when I was talking to school boards, you know, we talked about how are you going to handle the additional sub-costs for teachers and for educational assistants? What about operation and maintenance costs for cleaning and for janitors? Capital costs. In our rural districts, they have to think about the problems that you're going to have if you go to a digital format again and to online learning. What about IT costs, curriculum rollout, diploma exams? All of these things could be impacted by the COVID-19 rollout. And so could you maybe address that? And lastly,
Thank you, Mr. Smith, right to the buzzer. And with that, I propose that we will now go to a 5-minute break. Seeing that it is 10:40, I will ask that everyone be back here promptly at 10:45. So that concludes today, the break for today. And we will now move on to 5 minutes of questions from the official opposition, followed by 5 minutes of responses from the minister. As mentioned, members are asked to advise the chair at the beginning of their time if they want to combine their time with the minister's time. And please remember that discussions must flow through the chair at all times, regardless as to whether speaking time has been combined. Just for a bit of clarification to committee members, the maximum speaking time in this round is at 5 minutes, but members do not have to take the full 5 minutes. So if the overall block remains the 10 minutes. So it is possible to exchange more than once during that block, but keeping in mind that you can speak for up to 5 minutes at a time. And with that, we will go to Ms. Pancholi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, would you like to share time or continue block time?
Continue block time, please.
Thank you, Minister. So I will begin with following up on comments that you made, Minister, with respect to line 3.2 in the budget for learning support funding. When asked by my colleague, the member from Edmonton-Glenora, about the increase for the forecast for 2020-21, it sounds like, Minister, and please provide clarification if that's not the case, that increase from the budget for 2020 is all COVID-related funding, generalized support to the system as it relates to COVID. So you refer to the PPE, the critical care worker funding, and all of that. So it's not actually, it wasn't an increase that was focused on what I understood to be the purpose of this budget line item, which is funding to support the unique and diverse learning needs of children and students. Generally, of course, as the line items you described that are part of that funding are children with diverse learning needs, PUF, ESL, First Nation, Métis, Inuit funding. So it sounds like that increase is solely about increase to COVID funding for the generalized system, and I'd like you to confirm that. You also spoke about the 40 million increase from budget 2020 that's allocated in 2021 for learning support funding. However, I'm still seeking some clarification, Minister, as to what exactly that additional funding is for. You've indicated that it was a review that was done of the student learning support funding, special support funding, I should say, and that's what it's meant to address. But I'm not sure if you've provided any detail, I don't think you have, around what issues arose in the 2020 school year in this funding line that you believed the $40 million is meant to address. Specifically, Minister, I would, of course, point to what has become a grave concern to many Albertans, especially parents of young children with disabilities and with special learning needs, in the reduction in PUF. And I'm not interested in engaging in another discussion about whether or not PUF was actually cut, because we absolutely know in absolute certain terms that it was, because children who entered kindergarten were not eligible for PUF. They were they were eligible for the general support funding, which was significantly lower. And so I'm wondering if you could clarify precisely what the increase is for that, why it is increasing, what it is meant to address. Will there be an increase in PUF? As further, I'll follow up to my questions from my colleague, the member from Edmonton-Glenora, where she asked specifically about whether or not we'll be seeing an increase in PUF funding around the age criteria, perhaps to once again include, as is based in, I think, strong evidence and support, that additional support is needed in that kindergarten year. Will that be changing in the 2021 school year? As well as the hours of instruction. Because we have numerous examples, Minister, which I'm sure you've been aware, because I know you've received the correspondence, around how cutting off children from PUF supports during that kindergarten year has been devastating for these families and these children. Many felt that they were forced to go to access these services privately in private schools or private ECS operators, and if they couldn't afford it, they simply couldn't access it. Requiring a child with severe learning disabilities, because these are children who have severe learning disabilities, to have to go into the generalized kindergarten classroom. I know firsthand many parents who did not believe that was an appropriate way for their child to be learning. We also know, looking at the reduction in the numbers of enrollment for 2020, that the significant drop in students students or children in that year were in the pre-K, K years. Those are critical early learning years, and I think we should all be deeply concerned about the fact that that is the age group in which we saw the most significant drop of numbers of children engaged in quality early learning and early childhood education. And I imagine your budget should be funding and resourcing to accommodate for those lost children in those lost years, because we know that those early years are critical for future success in education. So I'd like to hear how you're accounting for that in your budget and providing additional supports to those young learners. I also want to make a quick comment, I've only got 30 seconds, about the approach that you're saying that the system is grateful that you took the approach of being held harmless. Basically, you're saying that the education system, after coming through an epically devastating year, the stress on students, on teachers, on educational assistants, on staff, on parents, and you're saying that what the system was asking you for was to hold them harmless. What an appallingly low standard we are setting when the system is actually saying, please don't make things worse.
Thank you, Ms. Pancholi. And now on to the Minister for 5 minutes of response.
Well, thank you for those questions. And I'll start with the last one first. The hold harmless is holding schools harmless at actually funding 730,000 students when only 705,000 students entered our schools. And so we've actually funded 25,000 more students than school authorities had in their system. So giving them the opportunity to have access to all those resource dollars and to additionally be able to increase reserves in a pandemic, certainly I would say is beneficial and has been beneficial. And that is what, in fact, school divisions were thanking me for. So I do believe that school boards and school authorities recognize that it has been an extraordinary year, absolutely extraordinary year, and they have done a tremendous job. And I want to give a shout out to all of the teachers and administrators, students out there, and the parents themselves, because they really have had to go through a very extraordinary year, as you have indicated. When I look at that line item that you were talking about, the learning support funding, the forecast that was the $1.6 million to the 1.3. Again, that is the line where the COVID funding, that $298 million of related COVID adjustments was made. It was a decision made by accounting to put it in that line item. But when you look at the fact that we have $1.356 billion, and I'm sorry, maybe I said million when I should have said billion earlier, $1.356 billion that is now $40 million more than the $1.315 billion budgeted in 2020, 2021. That is that additional $40 million that I was speaking about. So in budget 2021, which provides an additional $40 million to learning support funding envelope, this does include the PUF and the SLS grants that you were speaking about. So what I very much heard the concerns raised regarding the changes to PUF and the new funding model. I will take the next few weeks to listen to how we can improve the new model to ensure it is working at its very best for all students. We continue to really value, pardon me, the PUF and SLS programs, and we want school authorities to really focus their funding on the most vulnerable. So every single student who receives PUF and SLS funding will continue to receive the support that they need. The new funding model does provide school authorities with increased flexibility, reduced red tape to ensure PUF is directed to those children who need it the most. So in Alberta, and just so you're aware, and you probably are, but I'm just going to remind you that Alberta is the only province in Canada that offers funding for education supports to children as young as 2 years and 8 months. This is not going to change. 3 years of PUF funding for independent schools and 2 years of PUF and 1 year of SLS in kindergarten for school boards remains. So the independent schools get an extra year because they do not have access to that SLS grant funding in kindergarten. These grants continue to support school authorities in the provision of a continuum of supports and services to meet the learning needs of students within an inclusive environment. And we believe that all children in Alberta, including children with disabilities, deserve an education that prepares them for success. I was a former rehab practitioner, as you might know, specializing in working with the developmentally disabled, and I know how critical it is to have early intervention. And early intervention sets our children up for success. And so it's critically important to me that we get that particular envelope correct. And that is why there's an additional $40 million in that envelope. And as we move forward, prior to the funding manual and the profiles being distributed to school divisions, we will address any concerns that are in that area, and we will continue to offer the maximum supports that we can to our students. As you were talking about the number of students that are attending and that there has been a decline in particularly the early learning years, you're absolutely right. We need to ensure that our students, particularly in the early years, are supported. And that's why it is critical that we continue to fund school divisions. As I said earlier, when only 705,000 students attended, but we have 730,000 students.
Thank you, Minister. I'll let you just finish your sentence there really quickly.
Well, just that I was going to say that, you know, the projection is that many of those students in those early years are going to be coming into our school system to reach that 725,000 projection. But I just want to remind everyone that we are still funding 730,000 children because it is important to be ready for those early learners that are coming. Thank you.
Mr. Smith is up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Minister, for taking these questions again. We were sort of cut off, and you didn't get a chance to answer the last time we were talking together. So I'll just quickly remind you what we were talking about. We were looking at the COVID-19 pandemic and how education has had to try to adjust to the stresses of the COVID-19. And so my first question to you, just to remind you, was what budget line addresses the increased costs that many school boards have had to face as a result of COVID-19? And then the second question was how much of the education budget is targeted towards the additional costs being incurred due to the pandemic? And the third question that I asked was, can you provide us with examples of some of the additional costs and how much money has been set aside to address those concerns? And I had thrown out to you some of the things that just sort of crossed my mind were things like sub-costs for teachers and educational assistants, operations and maintenance costs that may be inflated because of the COVID-19. Were there any capital costs that we need to consider? IT costs? Is it going to affect the curriculum rollout? And maybe one completely out of left field for, and you can consider it, is the vaccine rollout going to affect impact teachers or schools? And then the last question I had before we got cut off was, has money been set aside to address how a new crop of student teachers are going to be able to address their practicum needs? You know, as a teacher of 30 years, I had the opportunity to have student teachers in my classroom on many occasions. I always enjoyed it. And I know that when you're in a rural community, that means that often you're getting students coming from a city environment and moving into a rural environment, into a smaller town. And that creates certain conditions that are important for them to have to consider. And now they have to throw COVID-19 on top of it. So is that going to affect their capacity to be able to take a rural assignment? Is it going to affect student teachers with comorbidities? How have we given any thought about that? So thank you, and I'll await your answer.
Thank you, MLA Smith. So very important questions. You're right. We were faced with an unprecedented year. No one could have imagined that we would be in the situation that we're in. No one, had I been told when I became Minister of Education that one day I would have to look at sending the whole school system to at-home learning in March of last year. It's almost a year to the day that we did that, made that decision. I would not have believed it, but of course we had to, and we did. We were one of the first school divisions or school systems across all of Canada to indicate that we were going to at-home learning indefinitely, because we had great health officials, Dr. Hinshaw and her team, guiding our decision making because they could see what was happening and what was going to happen in the future. So we did develop a very robust plan. We got together with our education partners, and for those who don't know, it would have been the Alberta Teachers Association, the College of Alberta School Superintendents, the Parent Association, the Alberta School Boards Association. We had health officials as well involved, the department as a whole, and we continue to hear from the general public as well. And we developed a very robust plan so that schools could reopen safely, that children, students could return to at home or from at home to in-person learning, and it has been very successful. We've had right now, I can share that it's 0.1% of students and staff have active cases of COVID, and that in my constant conversations with the education partners, they were happening weekly. They've gone to more of a bi-weekly. That we continue to problem solve. We continue to ensure that our schools are the absolute safest they can possibly be, and continually look at ways to improve. When I look at the availability of dollars to school divisions across this province, we had a number of dollars available, and I guess I'll put it, because it's such a large number, it's almost staggering. We had school authorities able to access $1 billion of additional funds. So I'll just remind everyone that in the 2020-21 school year, there was an additional $120 million in operational funding that all school authorities had access to. And then there was an additional $250.8 million of federal funding that I was able to disperse on a per student basis. We also had online and at-home learning federal funding of $12 million. We had the government support for critical workers benefit of $43.2 million. And again, I was so happy that we were able to have the most number of educational support workers receive that benefit from across all of Canada. Capital maintenance and renewal funding, as you had alluded to, MLA Smith, we accelerated $250 million of capital maintenance and renewal funding that school divisions were able to utilize to make improvements to HVAC and to go to touchless toilets and sinks and other items that they were able to enhance in their schools so that they could address the COVID needs. There was provincial funding for personal protective equipment, or PPE, of $10 million. We had an increase in operational funding, as I indicated earlier, of 120, and we also had the access to taxpayer-funded operating reserves of $383 million. All of this amounts to approximately $1 billion or more on an $8.3 billion budget. That is staggering numbers, but so needed, because these schools needed to ensure that the children that were coming back, the teachers that were coming back into a very safe environment. You talked about cases in school, and yes, I'm so proud to say that that the numbers were really low, and that we've seen very low transmission within schools as well. There have been times where we've had to go to at-home learning, but oftentimes that was due to staff shortages. And again, you alluded to that in terms of the substitute teachers. We have a finite number of substitute teachers who feel comfortable working in a COVID environment, because of oftentimes substitute teachers are teachers that have retired. But what we have seen is that schools have been able to take the plan that we had, and they've been able to shift very nimbly from in-person learning to at-home learning. And I've heard from superintendents and teachers themselves.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we have 2 minutes and 30 seconds approximately for Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I think I will do is just, the Minister didn't get a chance to answer the one question that one of the questions that I had, and that was about the new crop of student teachers. And so if maybe she could just finish that off briefly, and then I think we'll probably have our time done.
Perfect. And Minister, the floor is now yours. You've got approximately 2 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you. The question on student teachers, yes, it's a very important part of the student teacher journey is to be involved in practicums. And so when we went to at-home learning last spring, it was on the direction of the post-secondaries as to whether their teachers were able to participate in virtual practicums. We have seen since going back to in-school learning that many of the practicum students are able to be part of the in-home experience, in-school experience. So those teachers are being active in the classroom, and they are, I believe, benefiting from what has got to be one of the most unprecedented years ever. So they have been able to have both an in-school experience, but also the ability to provide students with at-home learning, to be able to go to those online programming. So there's been many, I would say perhaps, challenges, but also silver linings in this opportunity that school student teachers have been able to experience, which other student teachers would not have been able to experience in the past. And so when we look back in years to come, I'm sure that we will look back at this particular year as a learning year that is extraordinary for so many teachers. And I'm hearing that from the teaching community themselves, that this is something, many were not ready initially to go to a online learning type of scenario, but they have adjusted. And I'm understanding that as the school year has progressed, those transitions have been easier and easier. And so teachers are continuing to improve on their skill sets. And we look forward to ensuring that those new practicum teachers.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we go over to Mr. Deng.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. Would you like to go back and forth, or would you prefer block time?
I prefer block time, thank you.
In that case, thank you. I'd like to start in the fiscal plan. I've got a few things I want to get through, so I apologize. I'll go pretty quick here. Hopefully, you and your team will be able to catch it all and get some answers in for me. I'd like to start on page 139 of the fiscal plan, and I'm going to mostly refer to items in the fiscal plan under the renewing educational infrastructure area. And some of these questions are going to be follow-ups to things I've already asked the infrastructure minister, just to hear your perspective as well, because it is education monies, and some of them are going to be new questions as well. So the first thing I'd like to note is titled under playgrounds on the education infrastructure. And I note that in this year, there's a projected $6 million, and starting next year, there's no funds at all allocated for playground construction. Now, when I talked to the infrastructure minister about this in our estimates, he said that the $250,000 grant per school for new playgrounds in new schools was going to be bundled into the project cost as part of a new education envelope there. So given that we've also seen things like CFEP funding, which, as you know, Minister, many parents and schools access and communities access to fund playgrounds. Given that CFEP is also being cut starting next year, could you and your department assure me that there's going to be no changes to the playground grants? Could you assure us that playgrounds will continue to be fully funded, the grant will continue to be fully funded, and that new schools will get new playgrounds? I think it's something that's very important to many constituents across the entire province, and particularly those in suburban Edmonton and Calgary as well. I have a few other questions as well on things like modulars. So I want to look at in the same area under modulars being built. This year, of course, we can see a significant investment in modulars, right? I believe it's $89 million. But in fact, we can also see that those numbers will drop significantly down to only $25 million in the next 2 years. Could you break down for me, because the infrastructure was unable to actually, could you break down for me where these will go and how many you intend to build? So which districts will get how many of each modular, right? I think that's a very important question because we know that the enrollment, as my colleague from Edmonton, Glenora, has said previously, enrollment is growing significantly across departments. We're expecting 20,000 new students. So we know that because we need more classroom space, these modulars are essential. So there's only a limited number of modulars you can build, of course, with this amount of money, but who will receive them? How many will there be? And I'd like that breakdown, and if you can, in writing would be ideal. I want to move on again because we've talked a little bit there about modulars. It relates to new school builds as well. As you know, of course, you've announced that you're going to be building 14 new schools. But this year, you've only budgeted $33 million for a new school. And over 3 years for new schools, there's only projected, I believe it's $228 million total. An average project cost of a K-9 school is around $20 million. The average project cost of a high school is between 70 to 80 or even more than that. So it appears that would require almost $300 million or more dollars. So basically, it looks like these new school projects are underfunded. It looks like there isn't enough money for these new school projects. The infrastructure minister was unable to tell me whether there would be a predetermined delivery model, such as a public-private partnership or P3 versus a design-build process. I know that here in Edmonton Public School Board as well as Edmonton Catholic School District have both publicly said they don't want any more P3s. They've had really bad experiences, for example, at Bessie Nichols in the West End or at Monsignor Fiarson in the South End. But basically, these P3 schools across the entire city here have been failures, and they've had significantly worse outcomes. So could you assure me that A, these schools will be funded and built on time, and B, that you won't use P3s against school boards' wishes when they've publicly said they don't want these systems? And I'm hoping to fit my last questions in here on CMR. I know you spoke a little bit about CMR with Mr. Smith's questions previously, but I know that basically CMR's being cut $6 million this year, even though you say there was a acceleration through COVID grants. And then as we move into future years, it gets cut even significantly more than that, right? It's down to a third of current year numbers. So could you explain why you think school districts don't need that sustainable and long-term maintenance? And on top of that, could you explain a little bit about your rationale of changing from IMR or infrastructure maintenance and renewal to CMR, because CMR, of course, has less flexibility and less agency for school boards to manage their own maintenance requirements. So I'm wondering what the justification for this added red tape from your department is while reducing the autonomy and independence of our locally elected school districts. I think that's my time, but I'd like to see some answers to all these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dang. Right within the buzzer. Minister, you now have 5 minutes to respond.
Thank you so much. Great questions. And so something that I am very attuned to is playgrounds. And that was something that I wanted to really address early on in my term as Minister of Education. Was it just never made sense to me as a trustee for all those years that playgrounds, which are such an important, essential element of a student's ability to play and to also support their mental health and wellness, that those were never included in the capital budgets of schools. So that is something that has changed. All new school new school builds that have a K-6 component will have a playground budgeted directly into the overall cost of the build of the school. It will be built. School councils will no longer have to fundraise for those dollars, and they're significant dollars. They're approximately $250,000 to get an average, good quality playground built. So, of course, if they want to enhance the playgrounds, they can absolutely fundraise and develop even better quality playgrounds. But that being said, we are providing a very top-line playground included in the build. So I just want to highlight that in Budget 2021, we are providing $6.3 million for the construction of school playgrounds, which is an increase of $0.5 million from Budget 2020. We know that playgrounds not only benefit the students that get to use them, but they serve the community as a whole. They are hubs where parents and children meet and gather and play together. Since its inception in 2017, Education has funded 113 playground projects around the province. Of this, 61 are complete, 20 playgrounds are under construction, and 32 previously approved playgrounds will begin construction sometime in 21-22. School communities that wish to exceed the $250,000, as I said earlier, can fundraise to supplement the projects. And we have, and school divisions still have access to various sources of revenue, such as the CFEP that you were mentioning earlier. So again, we are protecting our investment and planning for the future by maintaining and enhancing our existing infrastructure and building new schools. And part of those new school builds will be playground infrastructure, as I said earlier. So when we go to your next question on modulars, again, very good question. I can share with you that that modulars, and this year in particular, we are actually funding it to a historic level, $90 million. Previously allocated was $25 million a year. This year we are $90 million because every year we receive an average of 400 requests for modular units from school jurisdictions right across the province. And we do have a number of aging units that need to be addressed. And so I felt very strongly that we needed to increase the number in that particular envelope so that we can address those aging units, but also look to enhance school divisions that require just that extra little bit of space. So typically they might not need a whole new school, but perhaps they just need 1 or 2 classrooms to be added to deal with the enrollment growth. The great thing about modular classrooms is that not only when we build a core school to address the needs of a community, as that community grows, modulars are added on so that they can grow with the community, but also when that community in time begins to shrink and student numbers start to drop, we can take those modulars and move them to another school where they can address an enrollment growth in another area. So modulars have been something that we've been utilizing to, again, add those extra needed classroom spaces as we need them, but also to decrease those spaces when they're no longer needed. So it's been a very effective tool that Education has been using, and I'm so proud to say that we are increasing that to historic levels so that we can address many of the needs and many more of the needs that, in fact, school divisions have been asking for. In terms of your next question on P3s in schools, and I, as you know, I was a former school board trustee, so I do have examples and understanding of P3s, but as you would also know, it is...
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we move on to the Government Caucus, and I believe we're going to be possibly hearing about transportation from Mr. Neudorf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that is exactly what I do hope to talk to. Minister, I do understand completely that you'll be releasing this full report in due course, and I don't want to provide any spoilers, but I do want to just talk about some of the things that are already publicly known out there. This was a great honor and privilege of mine to be the chairman of this task force. It was just really well set up by yourself and your ministry in terms of who is all on that task force, and I just mention a few of those associations and groups: the Alberta School Boards Association, the College of Alberta School Superintendents, the Fédération des Conseils Scolaires Francophones d'Alberta. If I did that right, I hope I didn't butcher it too bad. The chair has given me the wavy hand, so I apologize. This Association of School Business Officials of Alberta, Association of Alberta Public Charter Schools, Student Transportation Association of Alberta, the Alberta School Councils Association, RMA, and AUMA, just to mention some of those individuals that took part in that. And just a terrific group of people that spent a lot of time on this task force. During the course of the consultation, I do know just off the top of my head that members Hoffman, Loyola, Cece, and Phillips also took part, and I may have missed a couple of others that did as well, but that opportunity was definitely taken by them. Particularly, Member Hoffman had some excellent questions to draw out those conversations, and her experience and insight was really a part of the whole conversation. So I felt it was in large degree bipartisan in some of those aspects. Couple of the other comments on that. I know that for 21 hours of meetings around the province from far south to far north, I spent 27 hours driving, and got to see a lot of beautiful country and appreciate a lot of incredible people. I have learned that Albertans are truly amazing. They are strong, they are proud, and they are free. The school board volunteers around the entire province that give of their time, that care about Albertan kids. Honestly, it brings tears to my eyes to remember some of those experiences that I was able to share with them, where I would meet people in a gymnasium in a school in northeastern Alberta, and I would literally get hugs before and after the meeting to go to their town, see their school, and have these conversations. And it is said, highlighted at the very beginning of our report, that bus drivers are truly everyday heroes in Alberta. These people should be heralded from the rooftops every opportunity because of what they do and serve and how they take care of our children. Really, they are everybody's mom and dad, aunt and uncle, grandpa, grandma, whatever the case may be. And they are amazing, caring individuals. And I'm so proud to have worked with them in this small capacity. At the end of that time, we took that information that we'd gathered, literally binders full of information, of notes. I took copious notes at every meeting. I have a 2-inch binder full of handwritten notes that nobody besides myself can read. So that's a bit of a challenge. But with those notes, we sat down as a task force for over 2 weekends and spent 20 hours crafting that report. And again, I'm extremely proud to have been part of that. My colleagues that joined me in that endeavor also spent considerable effort to make sure that their thoughts were made known, and every individual on that task force should be commended. I'm very proud of that work. I am hoping that you are able to share a little bit more about this. Obviously, we know transportation is a major concern in both rural and metro areas for similar and yet different reasons. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Many students, especially in rural Alberta, spend hours every day on a bus. And we've also heard concerns from school boards about increased insurance costs. So could you speak to the task force findings and how any changes will fit into the $310 million budget and the line found on 3.4 in your estimates? I know this is an issue that you take seriously. I appreciate the numerous meetings you and I have had as well talking about this issue, as well as your staff that were a constant source of help. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Neudorf. It was actually very entertaining and interesting listening about your experience on the Transportation Task Force. I know I was very pleased to welcome you to my hometown of Fort McMurray, where you got to hear about how some of the challenges of students was bears and wolves. So that was kind of fun. And to that, Minister, I'll give you 5 minutes for response.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank MLA Neudorf for agreeing to be the chair. I know it was a very demanding task, and he certainly excelled at it. And I have heard nothing but positives from across the province on how those sessions went, on those engagement sessions, on how the whole task force was really committed to hearing the concerns. And there have been other attempts to do something similar in the past that did not yield the results that I have seen that have come forward from this task force, from this transportation task force. And I really appreciated MLA Neudorf's passion, as the rest of the panel as well. They were just so engaged, and I know that the fruits that it has borne we will be able to share very, very shortly. And I look forward to that point in time when I can share that more fully with everyone. I agree 100%. Bus drivers, they are essential. Oftentimes, our children are on the bus, and really relating with the bus drivers. They are seeing the kids first thing in the morning and last thing at the end of the day. And often I remember having my own children, being that we are on a farm just on the outskirts of Red Deer, that they were able to travel back and forth on the school bus, and that the bus driver, had such a good knowledge of who they were. He would often tell me, oh, so-and-so's not feeling so good. So they are just so passionate and care so much about our children. And that's why I was so pleased that they were able to benefit from the Critical Worker Benefit Program that was recently announced by the Minister of Labour. And so I'm glad that they were recognized in that way. So as you alluded to, we have nearly 300,000 students ride a bus to school each and every day. They travel more than 100 million kilometers per year. So under the Education Act and School Transportation Regulation, boards are required to provide transportation services for their resident students who live 2.4 kilometers or more from their designated school. Boards receive transportation funding to provide this level of service. We encourage jurisdictions to continue to look for efficiencies with their transportation operations, including exploring possible opportunities to enter into collaborative agreements with neighboring jurisdictions. We're always encouraging them to find better ways to provide the service, always maintaining safety as the top lens to look through when they're making decisions. But cooperative busing, just to give you an idea of what that looks like, currently we have 43 out of 61 boards, which is 70%, of our school boards have entered into cooperative transportation agreements to provide transportation services with their neighboring jurisdictions. Usually public boards working with their Catholic counterpart. This means that nearly 100,000 students are being transported on these cooperative transportation routes, which is excellent. But it also means that there's possibly another 30% where there's an opportunity to develop a cooperative agreement. And so we always encourage that, that type of cooperation between boards. Of the 18 boards that are not in any cooperative agreement, some are rural boards with no Catholic board in their area, and others are urban boards. In urban areas, sometimes it just doesn't make sense because of the high volume of students that are being transported. Full buses and attendance boundaries, sometimes they're not aligned, so sometimes that factors into it as well. The rural average ride time is 35 minutes, with only 12% of students being transported over an hour. And urban average ride times are 22 minutes. And I know this is a lot of time that our students spend on the bus. And so we are looking to see how can we shorten those time rides for these students or make them more effective to meet the needs. I just want to highlight that we are providing $310 million in this 21-22 fiscal year. And last year we had increased it by $15 million, which was a 5% increase. So I just really want to highlight that it is so important for us to get this part of the student experience correct. That's why we took the 2 years to put together the task force, to send them out, to get all of those.
Minister, very, very quickly.
Just all their learnings so that they could come back and share it with us. And again, thank you to the whole task force. They did an amazing job, and especially to the chair, MLA Newdorf, for his excellent, excellent work in this area.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we go back to the ND caucus and Ms. Hoffman.
Thanks. I'm going to ask just a couple of questions specifically as they relate. I appreciate that you are owning that there have been some significant concerns raised with local school authorities and your office around PUF and the implications of the changes that were made there. The minister said that there is going to be an examination, I believe, in the coming weeks. I imagine that that will be completed before everyone receives the funding manual on March 31st. So what are the issues that the minister is planning on tackling with that review as it relates to PUF? How are PUF criteria going to be examined to create greater distribution of supports for students who are young learners in need of additional learning support.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. To the Minister.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. As I indicated earlier, in Budget 2021, we are providing an additional $40 million in that learning support funding envelope, which, as I had indicated, covers many of those grants, and I could read them off again, but I think you know what they are. What I would say is that, we engaged and continue to engage with the education system. And so we've heard concerns in the areas around PUF, but we've also heard that there's other funding envelopes within that learning support funding that could be enhanced. And so we are going to take the next few weeks to really listen to the system on where we can improve the new model and ensure that it is working best for our students, particularly our students with special needs. We are continuing to value that PUF funding and the SLS funding. We want school authorities to really focus on where those resources can be provided to students. The new funding model does provide school authorities with increased flexibility. As I said, that whole envelope is over $1.35 billion now. And so we really want to ensure that that school authorities are able to allocate those dollars appropriately. They have maximum flexibility within those envelopes. Again, I want to remind you that Alberta is the only province in Canada that offers funding for education supports to children as young as 2 years, 8 months. And this is not going to change. It is so valuable that students have that early start. We know that, and I shared it with you earlier as a former rehab practitioner, that providing our students with that early intervention is critical and it sets them up for success. And having school authorities, and they told us very clearly, they want that flexibility to ensure that they are able to allocate those resources and supports where they're most needed. And as you know, having been a former trustee yourself, you know best what those students need, and they are in the best position to ensure that those resources are provided. So again, 3 years of PUF funding for independent schools, because again, they don't receive the SLS grant in kindergarten, and 2 years of PUF funding in addition to receiving SLS grant in kindergarten for school boards remains. The grants support school authorities in the provision of continuum supports and services to meet the learning needs of students within an inclusive learning environment. And it is so critical that we continue to have that inclusive learning environment. When I look at the fact that, I'm just going to give you a bit of a background on how the Education Act established specific obligations for school boards, public, separate, francophone, and charter, as they relate to students who may need specialized supports and services. School boards are required, to provide a continuum of supports and services for students that is consistent with the principles of inclusive education. So the program unit funding grant, for those who don't understand how it works, so prior to the new funding model, the existing PUF fund model was not operating as intended. Instead of going towards the students who need it the most, students with even mild or moderate language delays were being coded as PUF students on par with those with more serious issues. The result was that the average amount of PUF funds distributed per student was nearing the maximum amount available per student, an obvious sign that all students were being lumped together instead of given the specific attention that they required. The pre-K PUF grant is allocated using the weighted moving average enrollment of children between 2 years, 8 months to 4 years, 8 months, who have been assessed and diagnosed with a severe disability or delay involving language. All PUF children in the independent private system, both pre-K and kindergarten, will be funded at the pre-K rates established for the public system. Children diagnosed with severe disability or delay who are of kindergarten age in the public system as of September 1st would be funded under the new specialized learning support grant for K-12. The pre-K PUF allocation would be based on special education coding criteria for all eligible pre-K aged children diagnosed with a severe disability or delay and hours of instruction provided. Education provides PUF funding to school authorities for children with severe disabilities or delays who may require additional support beyond what is offered in a regular early childhood services program. And this is on top of the base funding that every school authority receives for children. In 2021, the weighted moving average was introduced that changed the manner in which PUF was calculated for school authorities. All school authorities that offered ECS programs were affected by these changes, but the rate of growth in PUF.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Hoffman, you have another 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Thanks. Yeah, what I was hoping we were going to get there was an answer to the question, which is the minister has highlighted there are significant concerns with PUF and that she is examining making changes to that program. And instead we got a 5-minute speech defending the program. But the minister herself at the beginning acknowledged that concerns were raised. Let me highlight what some of those concerns were. One, that she reiterated is that students who are 4 years, 8 months in kindergarten in private schools are entitled to PUF funding, but students who are the same age in public Catholic Francophone schools are not. That is a fact that she just restated, and it is a fact that PUF is a greater level of funding than the SLS funding that she talks about. So she is absolutely creating inequities between students who can afford to go to a private school, getting additional public funding for those who have disabilities, and those who are in public Catholic and Francophone schools who can't afford those additional fees that are tied to private schools. She also talked about how students who are 2 years and 6 months, 7 months are eligible. And that is true, but she made changes in last year's budget so that those who weren't attending a high number of hours, a full complement of hours, weren't entitled to full funding, which meant that many schools were forced to close a significant number of sites and reduce the number of supports for students. So while she says she's focused on equity, the way that she defines equity, it appears through last year's budget and what she's continued to defend through this year's statements in the last 5-minute speech, are budgets where students who are in need of support get none, and that some get all of the support. So it is the fact that the number of sites and the number of students in these programs has declined significantly over the last year, I think speaks to the fact that fewer students are getting support, disabled students, and the minister seems to be fine with that in this speech. But at the beginning, she did acknowledge that there were concerns and that she was going to be looking into some of those in the coming weeks. Parents have been talking about this for over a year, I will state, and continuing to explain and to try to justify the cuts that happen to their children's programming. I think they're watching this and they know the realities, and I assume the minister does too. The reality is that the supports for disabled children who were eligible for PUF went down significantly. For 5-year-olds, for kindergarten students in public Catholic and Francophone schools eliminated. They were moved on to a program that has far less support. And for those who weren't in full-time programming, their funding also was cut significantly. So, and essentially what happened is that programs all throughout our province closed. I believe that the minister's going to spend some time with our partners at Edmonton Catholic, and their 100 Voices programs had to be scaled back significantly, the number of sites and the number of students. I don't think that's something to be celebrated. I think the minister should roll up her sleeves and should fix these horrific changes that were made. I appreciate her past experiences, and she keeps using those as justification for why it is that she's moving these cuts budgets and defending them, and I don't think that that's fair or appropriate. So would the minister respond, what changes is she going to make to the PUF funding formula in this budget to reflect the needs of Alberta students?
Thank you. Minister, there's 36 seconds if you wish to respond.
Well, thank you, and I do believe I have answered the question on PUF. We do have an additional $40 million in the overall learning support funding envelope, which will then be distributed amongst the different funding envelopes, sub-envelopes that are in there. But at this point in time, I would like to highlight that what I believe Member Hoffman continues to forget is that third year for PUF funding is in our...
Thank you, Minister. The time has elapsed, and with that, we move on back to the Government Caucus, and we have Ms. Lovely.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, and just wanted to take a minute to highlight the fact that shortly after you were elected, we had the pleasure of you coming to Camrose and visiting one of our schools, and that was a nice treat, not only for the students, but the staff as well. And you took time to go through every classroom, and you acknowledged the good work that was being done in the classroom. And as a rural community, sometimes, you know, we have concerns, but in terms of education, I just wanted to thank you for always being available and taking that time so the students could meet you face to face. That was important to them. We do have a lot of community support in the Camrose constituency, and the school that you visited was one of the schools that requested some playground funding money, and that came through for them, so they were, of course, very, very happy. We do have more schools who need some funding, and through various initiatives, whether it be a community initiative or even a corporation that steps up to provide some funding, there's been a lot of camaraderie in terms of raising those funds, but we still have a little bit of work ahead of us, I can say. So that leads me to my question. Minister LaGrange, there are several schools in my constituency who do not have playgrounds. The task of raising money falls to parent groups, as I mentioned, who then have an opportunity to apply for matching funds once a certain threshold of money is raised. As already stated on page 139 of the fiscal plan, you have allocated $6 million towards building playgrounds. Minister, would you be able to outline the criteria your ministry will be using allocating that $6 million? Will there be money available in this budget for those schools who are currently working on raising money to access these funds? And as I mentioned, there are a few schools in my Camrose constituency that this applies to.
Thank you, Ms. Lovely. Now to the minister.
Thank you, MLA Lovely. And I do remember being out in your neck of the woods and being able to make snow angels with you. That was quite a treat. It was a little tricky too in a dress, but so there are, as you indicated, there's $6 million in funding to support playground projects previously approved. And so I'm very pleased with that. As I said earlier, I really do believe, particularly in the COVID year, students need that ability, children need that ability to get onto the playground and, you know, expend their energy and really just, you know, it improves your mental health. I love getting back on the swings. I'm sure many of you do as well. And just, you know, enjoying that fresh air that's outside. So as part of the new school project funding, a playground will be provided if it is one, this is the criteria that we've set, a new school project with a kindergarten to grade 6 component, or 2, a replacement school project with a kindergarten to grade 6 component, and the project is being built on an undeveloped greenfield. So schools that are choosing to raise funds for a playground continue to be eligible to apply for a matching grant through the Community Facility Enhancement Program that you were talking about earlier. And it is very, very important, as I said earlier, that we include that construction build of playgrounds within the new build of a school. I really feel very passionate about this. It should not have to be something that parents have to fundraise for. I do realize that some schools prefer to fundraise, and that's perfectly fine. But for those that want to take advantage of the program that we offer, any new build will have a playground built, and they can certainly fundraise to enhance that playground. Some have actually fundraised so that they can provide additional supports for special students, specialized students like wheelchair ramps and et cetera, things that typically aren't in a playground. But what I see is that schools really do try to provide the very best for their students. They want their children to be outside playing and enjoying playground projects. And so that's why it's critically important that we continue this great work. Again, to give you a little bit of background, I believe I said it earlier, but it bears repeating that since its inception in 2017, education has funded 113 playground projects around the province. Of this, 61 are complete, 20 playgrounds are under construction, and 32 previously approved playgrounds will begin construction sometime in 2021-22. School communities that wish to exceed the 250, as I said, they certainly can supplement that by fundraising, which has been really difficult in the COVID year. I've heard that from school councils across this province that given COVID, it has been really difficult to have the fundraisers that they typically have in a given year. You know, and all of, you know, being a parent myself, I remember many of the bake sales and the numerous things that were done to fundraise for school divisions. So school jurisdictions still have access to various other sources of revenue to plan and build a playground. The Government of Alberta provides funding through the Ministry of Culture, Multiculturalism, and the Status of Women Community Facility Enhancement Fund. So if a jurisdiction receives the CFEP grant, they aren't eligible for Education's Playground Grant. But again, this is something that because we are now providing playgrounds as part of the build, fewer schools will need to have access to that particular grant. The program has been very successful and very well received thus far. So we continue to protect our investment. We continue to plan for the future by maintaining and enhancing our existing school infrastructures and buildings by building new schools. And as has been indicated, we're going to be building 14 new schools or having major modernizations of 14 new projects this year. So that's exciting. I'm so excited to bring that forward and be able to name those projects. I know school jurisdictions across the province are eagerly awaiting that news. So Education's investment in playground infrastructure is a grant program that is designed to further enhance school builds. Everyone wants to attend a school that has a playground. It's critical. You look at how the community gathers around the playground. Oftentimes you will see parents and grandparents out with their children and their grandchildren on the swings, on the slides. It is such a great...
Minister, I'll let you very quickly finish up that.
Just a great way to get outside and enjoy that sunshine that we're seeing more and more of in Alberta each and every day.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And with that, we will go back to the government caucus. And Miss Lovely, you've got 2 minutes and 42 seconds.
Great. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. You know, I completely agree with you. Getting out on the playground with families, with multi-generations, I think that's great for people to be able to spend that time together. And real solid friendships are built on the playground as well. Getting that break from the day-to-day classroom studies, it just really is a nice opportunity for our young people to develop lifelong friendships that start on the playground. And I find that even as an adult, if I take a break and do some physical activity, I'm able to focus better. And I think that a playground really helps our kids get back to learning again, which is, of course, the primary objective of sending them to school. So I'm glad to hear that there's an investment by our government, and the parents for future schools are going to be very happy. I know that I've expressed the challenges that many families, many parents have expressed raising funds during COVID. It's been very difficult for some of them, and not always an even playing field. Some of the various corporations who normally would be very generous and happy to support a playground build just don't have that financial means to be able to do it right now because of COVID. Their businesses have suffered a bit. But I'm very fortunate to have some very strong community support and really grateful for all those dollars that have been raised. And that concludes the end of my questions for now. And I would like to cede the remainder of my time to Member Rutherford.
Well, there's 1 minute, Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Chair, and that was the next question I was going to ask you. Minister, I just want to start off by saying thank you for being with us today and for your leadership during these difficult times, and for all of your staff. as well. This is not an easy situation to be in, and you touched on that earlier as well. But also a thank you to all of the school boards, the teachers, the parents, and of course the students who have persevered over this last year and adapted quickly to an evolving situation that seems to hopefully be calming down. And as we start to see those vaccination rates increase, we can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, which I think everybody is looking forward to. And as I get into my broader comments, understanding that I've only probably have a few seconds left, and I'll pick up this on the other side, is for both the cities that I.
Mr. Rutherford, I'll let you very quickly finish up if it's less than a minute or less than a few seconds.
Oh, sorry, Madam Chair. I'll pick up on these comments in the next block. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ms. Pancholi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I'd like to pick up a little bit with respect to specialized learning support funding. Again, we've asked multiple times as to how that additional $40 million is going to be spent, and I have to say, and for any parents who are listening, it seems pretty clear you don't have an answer for that. But I want to highlight one thing that jumped out at me about the specialized learning supports funding is that it's linked to, at least a portion of the formula is linked to a jurisdiction's number of children who are eligible or receive, I should say, not eligible, but actually receive family supports for children with disabilities, which means that there is an element of how many of those cases are approved in the FSCD process. That actually bears weight on how much support is provided for funding for that child when they're in the school system. And I have a concern about that because I myself and my colleague, the member for St. Albert, have been engaged in many discussions about some of the concerns around FSCD funding, and now to learn that it is tied to that child, to a jurisdiction's funding for specialized learning supports is a concern. And I actually want to highlight a message that I just received, which talked about a parent who I know has two young children who are receiving specialized learning supports and are on FSCD. FSCD just took away their 7-year-old's speech support, and we're told that they're just going to have to go seek that speech language support in the school system. In the school system, that child has only received one session in the entire year because of funding, lack of funding supports at the school board level. I understand the minister highlighted that the school boards have obligations to provide inclusive education. That's absolutely a legal obligation. It's also the obligation of this government to fund it properly. And school boards can only do so much with the funding that they're given. So when we hear that the approach that's being taken right now is just to do no more harm after the year that we have experienced, I want to know how this budget actually reflects an investment in children, staff, families who have experienced extreme and difficult hardship during the school system over the last year. We've heard this minister talk about caring about mental health supports, but by holding the budget flat, where is the supports for mental health going forward? We hear the minister talking about reviewing specialized learning supports funding, but I question how we are going to make up for the lost year for many children with disabilities. I heard from parents telling me that they have a child with disabilities and they've basically written off the past year of education for their child, which should be appalling to all of us to hear that any child's education has been completely written off over the last year. So we have a lot of work to do, not just to invest in these children going forward. They deserve adequate support funding going forward, and that is not reflected in this budget. But we also need to make up now for the fact that many children have lost a significant amount of supports that they need over this past year. So I'd like to hear a concrete answer as to how this budget, which is, as you've maintained, is pretty much flat, actually will
Remind you to direct your questions through the chair. And
thank you. Through the chair to you, Minister. I'd like to hear how your budget reflects the investment that's required to make up for the experience that children with disabilities and all children have experienced over the past year, because I do not hear that, Minister, and I would like to hear some concrete answers on that.
Thank you, Ms. Pancholi. And now to the Minister for your response.
Well, thank you for the questions. And as I've responded to these questions over and over again, I will continue to respond that we've added an additional $40 million into the learning support envelope for special needs supports. And when I take you back to the fact that we're $1.356 billion, and I still want to go back to the initial comments that I made to MLA Hoffman, that while we are funding 730,000 students. We know that only 705,000 students have currently in school. So we are funding an additional 25,000 students. We know that in the projection there's 725,000 students, and we are still going to fund 730,000 students, which includes our special needs students. And I'm so proud of the fact that we've added that additional $40 billion in that funding. So just to elaborate on the specialized learning supports and what that provides in the Specialized Learning Support Grant, as recommended by school divisions throughout the consultation process, we're combining funding sources within a Specialized Learning Support Grant, which will enable school boards the flexibility to provide a range of supports to students with learning disabilities in an inclusive learning environment. So that was something we heard very, very strongly from our school divisions and our school authorities. School authorities are responsible for ensuring their SLS funding is dispersed based on a student's needs basis related to supports required for their learning. This grant incorporates funding previously distributed as inclusive education, regional collaborative service delivery, and program unit funding for kindergarten students, which will enable school boards the flexibility to provide a range of supports for students with learning disabilities in an inclusive learning environment. And we know how important that inclusive learning environment is. School jurisdictions are eligible for funding under all three components. Accredited funded private schools and private ECS operators are not eligible to receive SLS funding. So charter schools are given an option to be funded under the SLS grant for charter schools or to continue under the Sphere Disabilities funding model. The funding option will be in effect to the end of the 22-23 school year. So again, I want to highlight that we've added $40 million to this funding envelope that we will then be dispersing out to school authorities so that they can then, as I said earlier, provide the resources that are required and needed by students within this area. And I know there was a previous question about a particular school division, a public school division in Edmonton, and I just want to highlight that that public school division, Edmonton Public, in 2019-2020 had 103,926 students, actual head count. They projected 106,723 students in the 2020-21 school year. They actually had 101,986 students attend. So there was approximately 4,000 students, if I can do the rough math, that were funded that didn't actually attend that school division. So they had the additional resources of those 4,000 students that they could apply to wherever they needed to apply those resources. And so certainly when they're making staffing decisions, whether it is EAs or teacher decisions, those should be factored into their decision making. And again, in this area of specialized learning supports, it is so critical that school divisions allocate their resources that they have maximum flexibility on to the proper needs. So do they require additional educational aids? Do they need technology, et cetera? Those dollars are there to support those students. And it is very, very important that those schools use those dollars and support the students. And I just want to remind everyone again that even in a pandemic year, school authorities were able to increase their reserves. They went from $363 million in 2019 to $383.6 million as of August 31st of 2020. That's a substantial increase of $21 million when in fact they had projected to go in and utilize those reserves.
Thank you, Minister. And now to Ms. Pancholi.
And how much time do I have? Sorry.
You have 1:07 seconds left in this, and then another 30 seconds that will carry over.
Okay, thank you. Minister, I just wanted to reiterate one question that I asked you earlier, which I have not yet heard a response to, which is regarding the drop in the number of pre-kindergarten and kindergarten children who were enrolled in the 2020 year. Based on the information, the enrollment information that's available, in this age group, it saw almost a 20% drop in enrollment compared to the previous year. That has long-term implications for school readiness going down the road. So once again, I will ask you, it's related to the previous questions, through the chair, how your budget reflects how you're going to catch up on the lost early learning of almost 20% of these kids in this age group from the previous year. I'd like to hear a concrete example.
Minister?
Thank you for the question. And as a member opposite would know, that parents make the choice as to sending their children to school, whether it's preschool or whether they send them to kindergarten even. Kindergarten is optional in Alberta, and yet we did fund our school divisions to have those
Minister, I'm sorry, I apologize for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for the consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I would like to remind all committee members that we're scheduled to meet on March 10th, 2021 at 3:30 to continue our consideration of the estimates of the Ministry of Health. Thank you, everybody. The meeting is now adjourned.
My name is Adriana LaGrange, and I am the MLA for Red Deer North. Red Deer North is just an amazing community filled with so many people that really volunteer their time and their effort for the betterment of all of the citizens of Red Deer. We also have a very strong agricultural and also a very strong business community. We have the best of all worlds in Red Deer North. What I like about being an MLA the most is meeting all the wonderful people I get to interact with on a regular basis. Between being an MLA and being the Minister of Education, I get to meet a wide variety of individuals with some very unique concerns, and the ability to help people navigate through the governmental process is something I really appreciate. What I really like to do outside of work is spend time with my family. I have 7 children and 4 grandchildren, and so it's a growing family, and I really like to spend as much time as possible with them. But beyond that, I really still like to volunteer. I like to be active on our family farm, and I do like to pick up a book for pleasure and read as much as possible, and just really relax and spend time with my husband and my children and the broader community.
My name is Dale Nally, and I'm the MLA for Morinville, St. Albert. I have a wonderful constituency, and it's very unique, and what makes it unique is that when I have one of the rare urban ridings. So we have a third of the riding is actually urban. It makes up the northeast corner of St. Albert, and then 2/3 of the riding is actually rural, and it goes right up to Legal and Redwater. So it has a nice mix of urban, rural acreages, farms, that type of thing. And it also includes the industrial heartland as well. Without a doubt, the best parts about the job are the community events. So I had a pretty busy summer, but one of the coolest memories that I have of last summer was teaching kids in Gibbons how to fish. That was a special day. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had an event out in Legal where we actually made sugar taffy. Now, I have to tell you, I'd never heard of sugar taffy before, but actually having a chance to make it myself with the maple syrup and the ice shavings, it was a lot of fun. And it's delicious, by the way, so if you get a chance to try some, you really should. Well, I confess I spend a lot of my time in ice rinks throughout this province because I have my youngest son plays hockey. I used to help out more, both on and off the bench, but since being in this role, I haven't been able to help out as much as I like, but I certainly attend as many of his games as I can. Other than that, I enjoy playing hockey myself, I enjoy traveling, and when I have time, I just love to read a good book as well.
My name is Jason Copping, and I'm the MLA for Calgary Varsity, and I'm also the Minister for Labour and Immigration. What I really love about Calgary Varsity is the institutions, the parks, and the people. We have the University of Calgary, the Foothills campus, the Children's Hospital. We have fantastic community associations, some of the best in the city. And we have Beaumont Park, one of the most beautiful parks in the River Valley that people go to play and spend time together as families. I also love the passion of the people in our riding. Our riding focuses on policy. As a former policy guy, that's what got me interested in politics. And people in Calgary Varsity love to talk about policy and looking at different ways that we can solve the problems that are facing Albertans today. I love dealing with our constituents. I love hearing about the issues that they have and hearing about their ideas. We have multiple conversations on issues such as education, healthcare, and the single biggest one is jobs in the economy. And quite frankly, that's the reason that I ran, is how do we solve these problems? And the residents of Calgary Varsity, especially with the university there, have lots of ideas on how to solve these, and having conversations with them about how to address these issues is what I love being an MLA. I love to cook for my family. I'm not very creative, except when it comes to in the kitchen. We have 3 daughters, and pasta is a really big thing, so Italian cooking is really big in my household, and I love to do that for my wife and for my kids.
I'm Jackie Armstrong-Hominick, the MLA for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville. Well, I'm fortunate enough to have the best constituency in the province, according to me. It's a urban riding, which is a mixture of rural and urban. That includes the Alberta's industrial heartland, many oil and gas, ag-related industries, and many small businesses. In my constituency, there are many landmarks, one of them which is the Vegreville Pesinka. That's the Easter egg. And then I'm also proud to represent the duck in Andrew and the sausage in Mundare, and of course the County of Lamont, which is a home to many, many churches. We're fortunate enough to have beautiful rolling canola hills on the northern part of my riding, prairie on the southern part of my riding, and of course Elk Island Park. I love being an MLA because I love to help my constituents. I love to help them solve their problems. I like to give them connections so that they can find the resources that they need, and I just like working with people. On my free time, I like to spend time with my family, going to my daughter's dance recitals or to football games with my son. When my husband and I have time together, I like to do outdoor sports with him, like fishing. Occasionally we go hunting, and a good day of shopping with my girlfriends never ever hurt anyone.
Hello there, I'm Jackie Lovely, MLA for the constituency of Camrose. The most wonderful thing about my constituency is the people. We have such a great sense of community there where neighbors help neighbors, and they're the kind of people who, when they ask, "How are you doing?" they wait to find out what the answer is. In our community, we have a lot of agriculture, and I'm very proud of the farming communities that we have. They're long-standing families that have farmed for many, many years. And what's interesting about our community is we have 10 Hutterite colonies who make a huge contribution to the economy. Well, there's so many things that I love about being an MLA, but the very most important thing to me is being able to help people. So this summer, I actually did some door knocking throughout the entire community again, and I took my cell phone with me and was able to do some video capture of some different challenges that people in my constituency were having. I did some emergency trips and was able to see ministers in our legislature and was able to get help for those people. So I feel good about that. My most favorite thing to do is spend time with my family. And so anytime we have an opportunity to get together, I certainly like to do that. My kids are grown up and gone, they're working, they have their own lives, but we're a very tight-knit family, so I do like to spend as much time with them as I can. I also like to run, and one of the best kept secrets in Camrose is the River Valley that runs through the middle of the city. A lot of people don't know that it's there. And when I go out and I run, I see deer, I see birds, trees, beautiful water. It's just such a gorgeous place to be. I really enjoy it. And I like to go driving. Sometimes I just like to drive through the countryside. And especially during the summer when I see the crops waving in the wind, that is just the most beautiful sight ever.
Hi, my name is Jordan Walker, and I'm the MLA for Sherwood Park. What I like so much about my constituency is the strong sense of community. A lot of people might say we're Edmonton East, but in fact we're not. We're our own strongly identifiable community. You know your neighbors, and when you go to the grocery store, you'll see people you know and people that you're involved with in sports or volunteer activities or in churches. We are an entrepreneurial capital within our entrepreneurial province of Alberta, whereby we have over 11,000 businesses. Strathcona County is the home of entrepreneurs, doers, and deciders that drive our economy forward. Furthermore, economically, we're very blessed to be a refining capital in Alberta, and we also are a petrochemical superpower. What I love the most about being an MLA is serving the people in my community. I'm so proud to be a resident of Sherwood Park, and I love dealing with all files and constituent concerns that come to my office. Fundamentally, it is to serve the great people of Sherwood Park is what I enjoy the most. I wake up every day so happy and proud to do in this blessed province of Alberta. I just feel unbelievably honored and privileged to do that. What I like to do in my free time is spend time with my family. I love to spend time with my wife, and her mother lives with us. I love to spend time with my mother-in-law, and we have also a 3-year-old Australian cattle dog. His name's Kai. He's so energetic and rambunctious. We love taking him around the various awesome dog parks we have in Sherwood Park. I also really enjoy movies and sports. Go Oilers, go!
My name is Marlon Schmidt, and I'm the MLA for Edmonton Gold Bar. I have to say that my favorite thing about the constituency is the people. A really strong sense of community. A lot of the people who live in Gold Bar grew up in Gold Bar, and now they're raising their own kids in Gold Bar. We have a wonderful set of trails through the River Valley and Mill Creek Ravine. Gold Bar Park is a fantastic place for cross-country skiing. We get hundreds of people out there every weekend in the wintertime. The people in Gold Bar really look out for their friends and neighbors, And you can see that in their activism at schools and at their community leagues, a really active, engaged community. I love working with the people on the things that matter to them. I ran for this position because I wanted strong public health care, strong public education, and as MLA for Edmonton Gold Bar, I get to work with my constituents to make sure that those things are there for the people in my neighborhood and all across Alberta. I've got kids, so when I'm not working, I'm spending a lot of my time with my kids and my family. They're 18, 12, and 9, so they're all involved in different activities, soccer, cheerleading. I like to play video games, so I play video games with my kids and on my own too. Got a little dog that we take for walks around the neighborhood. Those are the things that keep me busy when I'm not working.
I'm Miranda Rosen, and I am the MLA for Banff-Kananaskis. I have the most beautiful riding in all of Alberta, if not all of Canada, I would argue. Banff-Kananaskis is where the bald open prairies and the open skies meet the Rocky Mountains. We've got beautiful Banff, Canmore, Lake Louise, Kananaskis country, and we've also got the incredible prairie and rural communities of Springbank, Millerville, Prentice, Bragg Creek. We've got some of the most amazing people, the friendliest people, the most hardworking people, and we've got a little bit of everything going on in Banff-Kananaskis. On one side, we've got a thriving tourism industry. In fact, tourism is 89% of Banff's GDP. On the other side, we've got tons of construction, and we've got energy industry, and we've got farming and cattle ranching. So I've got a very diverse constituency full of incredible people and beautiful landscapes. Being an MLA is such a tremendous honor. It's an honor not only to be a part of history, but it's an honor to fight for the incredible people that we represent and fight for this amazing province that we call home. Our government's been doing a lot of work to really reinvigorate Alberta's economy and really lift people up. I think it's been a tough few years for a lot of Albertans, and we're working as hard as we can. We've been very proactive with a lot of ambitious policy and legislative agenda goals, and it's been such an honor to not only represent the people of our province, but to start to see the fruits of our labor pay off. In my spare time, whenever I get some, I suppose you could call me a bit of an amateur hobbyist. I play the piano, I play the oboe in a concert band in Canmore, And I do enjoy sewing, and I actually make a lot of my own clothes. But when I'm not being crafty, I do live in the mountains. And I think it's a given that you have to enjoy them. So as many weekends as I can, if I'm not working, I love hitting the slopes. We've got some of the world's best ski hills out in Banff, Kananaskis. And I try to ski and get out there as much as I can.
Hello, my name is Nate Glubish, and I'm the MLA for Strathcona Sherwood Park. Strathcona Sherwood Park is a great constituency that includes a mix of both urban and rural communities. It covers an urban section of Sherwood Park, as well as several unique hamlets, including Ardrossan, South Cooking Lake, Antler Lake, and Hastings Lake, just to name a few. Within our resilient and dedicated rural communities, we have a strong focus on agriculture, farming, and conservation. Many families that live in my constituency work in the various refineries and petrochemical facilities in the Alberta industrial heartland. This riding includes so many great communities, each of which host exciting events throughout the year, from tractor pulls to trail days to parades and country fairs. These events give families all across Strathcona County and Sherwood Park a chance to connect with one another and to build strong communities. One of my favorite parts of being an MLA for Strathcona Sherwood Park is getting to meet with the leaders of the various organizations that work hard to serve the residents of our community. These are organizations like the Saffron Center, which supports survivors of sexual violence with counseling. Or organizations like Linking Generations, which connect many young students with seniors in our community to develop relationships, share experiences, and build character. Organizations like Volunteer Strathcona that recruits volunteers from across our community to assist various charitable causes, including cutting lawns, delivering groceries, or picking up prescriptions for residents who can't leave their homes. Meeting with them and with constituents from across my riding helps to keep me in tune with the priorities of Albertans. I'm proud to be part of a government that is making our province a better place to live, work, and raise a family, as we work to attract investment, grow the economy, and create jobs. These may be challenging times for Alberta, but Albertans have a long history of overcoming adversity, and we will do so again. Serving as a cabinet minister has been one of the greatest experiences of my life. It has afforded me the opportunity to bring forward new legislation to improve the lives of my constituents and all Albertans. My priority is to make positive changes to our province, both for today and for generations to come. Outside of work, I like to spend time with my son Max and my wife Allison. I've always been a hobby musician, so playing piano and guitar, I find this to be a great way to forget about the stress of a long day of work. I also enjoy running on the many beautiful trails and paths throughout my constituency. And when Max is older, I look forward to showing him the stunning parks, lakes, and many communities across Strathcona-Sherwood Park.
My name is Peter Singh, and I'm an MLA for Calgary East constituency. Calgary East is a very diverse community there, and also the community has got businesses, large and small businesses, and also 17th Avenue is the heart of this community here, which connects all the communities together. Stretching from the Bow River to the city limits at 116th Street, residential areas, industrial areas, and newly constructed neighborhoods, Calgary East truly is a microcosm of all that makes Calgary great. I like to hear the constituents and their concerns there. Being an MLA, I can help them better now. I can extend my responsibility as an MLA, and we can work towards solving their issues. I am so proud to have the privilege to represent my neighbors, friends, and families in the legislature. Before politics, I used to be a businessman here. I still love to talk about business in my community there. I'm happily married with my wife Reena and proud father to my son Kishan and daughter Komal. I like golfing when I have free time, and also I love soccer. I used to play soccer back home in Fiji Islands, and I still want to do that.